A civilization more advanced than ancient Greece, wiped out in a single day by a catastrophe so powerful that it sank an entire island into the sea. That's the story of Atlantis, and for centuries it's been treated as a fantasy. But now, archaeologists are uncovering sunken cities, mysterious stone circles, and evidence of ancient floods that fit the Atlantis legend perfectly. The problem? No one can prove it. But before we dive in, if you're new to this channel, consider hitting that like and subscribe button if you haven't already. Also, let us know where you're watching from and what time it is. So without further ado, let's begin, shall we? The enduring enigma. Every generation redraws the map. Every generation points to a new shadow on the horizon. Some say the island lies beneath the Atlantic, somewhere past the Pillars of Hercules where the sea runs deep and dark. Others place it in the Mediterranean, near islands that still breathe fire from their peaks. A few look to the frozen south, where ice hides what the ocean once claimed. The theories multiply like ripples from a single stone. But the story itself never changes, not in its bones. Once, long ago, there was a great island kingdom. It was no ordinary kingdom. Its cities gleamed with metals we still prize today. Its harbors welcomed ships from every direction. Its armies were strong, its rulers wiser than most. The people of this island seemed blessed by the gods themselves. They had everything. And then, in a single day and night, they lost it all. The earth shook, the waters rose, the island sank. Gone. As if it had never been. That is the story. Simple, tragic, almost too neat to be true. And that neatness is exactly why it has survived so long. Because we recognize the shape of it. We have seen proud nations fall. We have watched nature erase what human hands built. The fall of Atlantis feels familiar, even though we have never stood on its shores. It works on us like a fable. It warns, it haunts, and it refuses to be forgotten. The first written record of Atlantis appears in the works of a Greek philosopher, but that is a chapter for later. For now, what matters is the atmosphere that surrounds the legend, the way it hangs in the air of every age it passes through, the way it adapts to whoever is listening. To the ancient Greeks, it was a cautionary tale about pride. To medieval scholars, it was a puzzle of geography and scripture. To Renaissance thinkers, it was proof that the world held secrets yet unearned. To the modern seeker, it is a challenge, a dare, a door left ajar. Part of the appeal is the mystery itself. Human beings are drawn to unfinished stories. We want to close the circle. We want to find the ending that was stolen from us. Atlantis offers exactly that. It is a story with a missing final page, and so we keep searching, not just for an island, but for closure, for certainty, for the reassurance that our own world with all its noise and chaos is not the only reality that has ever existed. Another part of the appeal is scale. Atlantis was not a small thing. It was vast, wealthy, and ambitious. It reached beyond its borders, it built an empire across the waters, and it fell completely. The scale of that fall speaks to something deep in us. We build our towers, we stack our achievements, we believe we are immune to time, and then we remember Atlantis, and we wonder. The legend touches on other questions too, questions about human nature, about what happens when power outgrows wisdom, about whether progress has a price. Atlantis becomes a mirror. Every age look sees its own fears reflected back. The Romans saw a warning about imperial greed. The Victorians saw a lost civilization that might explain the wonders of the ancient world. The 20th century saw a parable about nuclear fear and environmental collapse. The mirror never cracks. It just shows a different face each time. There is also the geography of the mystery. Where exactly was Atlantis? The question has driven explorers to the edges of maps and the depths of the sea. Some have combed the ocean floor near the Azores, hoping to find a sunken plateau. Others have studied the volcanic islands of the Mediterranean, where entire cities have been buried under ash and rock. The search has produced countless books, documentaries, and heated debates. It has also produced disappointment, because the ocean keeps its secrets well. But the search itself has value. It forces us to look closer at our own history. It pushes us to ask what really happened to the civilizations that came before us. And sometimes it reveals something unexpected. Not Atlantis, but something real. Something that reminds us how fragile human achievement can be. Think about the places we have already found beneath the waves. There are cities under the sea, real ones. Stone streets and temple walls, swallowed by earthquakes or rising waters. They are not Atlantis. They are better, because they are true. And they prove that the core idea behind the legend is not fantasy. Civilizations have vanished. The sea has taken them. The earth has swallowed them. The memory of them has faded into strange shapes. And those shapes, over time, become myths. Atlantis may be one of those shapes, a memory stretched and polished, passed from hand to hand until it became a legend. Or it may be something else, something we have not yet understood. The truth is that we do not know, and that not knowing is part of the spell. The legend has also become a home for our imagination. Writers have set utopias on its shores, filmmakers have sent heroes to its depths, poets have used its fall as a symbol for every lost dream. Atlantis no longer belongs only to the past. It lives in the present, in every story we tell about a better world that slipped away. It is the city we almost built, the future we almost reached, the chance we almost took. And yet, for all its power, the legend remains stubbornly quiet. It offers no proof, it demands no belief, it simply waits. And that patience is part of its genius. Because the longer it waits, the more room it gives us to wonder. And wonder feeds the legend. It keeps it alive. This documentary is a journey into that wonder. We will follow the story from its first telling to its latest theory. We will weigh the evidence. We will meet the believers and the skeptics. We will walk the line between history and imagination. And at the end, we may not find Atlantis, but we will find something just as valuable, a deeper understanding of why we need such stories, why we cling to them, why we refuse to let them go. Because Atlantis is not just a place, it is a question about the past, certainly, but also a question about ourselves, about what we build, about what we lose, about what we remember, and about what we choose to believe, even when the evidence is thin. The story begins with a philosopher, a man who wrote down what he heard and in doing so gave the legend its first breath. But before we reach him, let us sit with the mystery itself. Let us feel its pull. Let us acknowledge that some questions are worth asking even when we cannot answer them. The ocean is wide, the past is deep, and somewhere between the two, an island waits. Maybe real, maybe imagined, maybe both. The search begins now. Plato's account 1 was Athens itself, in a form far older than the city Solon knew. The other was an island nation beyond the Pillars of Hercules, the rocky gateway we now call Gibraltar. The island was larger than Libya and Asia combined. It was rich, it was powerful, it was called Atlantis. Plato places this conversation inside his dialogue, but he does something clever. He layers the story. It is a tale within a tale within a tale. Each telling adds distance. Each narrator adds doubt, and yet the details remain strangely precise. Atlantis, as Plato describes it, was ruled by a confederation of kings. They descended from the god Poseidon and a mortal woman named Cleito. Poseidon shaped the island himself. He carved concentric rings of land and water, alternating circles like a target seen from above. At the center stood a hill, and on that hill a temple. The temple gleamed with precious metals. Its roof was plated with orichalcum, a mysterious metal that glowed like fire. The walls were clad in silver. The pillars were covered in gold. The city was a marvel of engineering. Canals connected the rings, wide enough for warships to pass. A great bridge spanned the outer ring. Tunnels pierced the walls of earth. The harbor teemed with vessels from every corner of the known world. Docks rose and fell with the tide. Warehouses bulged with goods. The palace itself was a labyrinth of courtyards, baths, and gardens, each one more lavish than the last. But Atlantis was not just beautiful, it was strong. Its army marched in perfect formation. Its navy ruled the waves. The island controlled the sea routes, the trade winds, the flow of goods and gold. Its influence stretched westward to the distant shores of the Americas and eastward to the gates of the Mediterranean. And for generations, the Atlanteans were wise. Their kings followed the laws of Poseidon. They consulted the sacred inscriptions on a pillar of orichalcum. They held council at dawn and dusk. They governed with justice. They kept their power in check. But then something shifted. The divine blood in their veins grew thin. The human blood grew strong. And with it came pride, greed, ambition. The kings looked at their empire and wanted more. They no longer listened to the old laws. They no longer honored the old gods. They decided to conquer everything. This is where Plato brings the story back to Athens. The ancient Athenians, he says, stood against the Atlantean tide. They fought alone, abandoned by their allies. They pushed the invaders back. They broke the Atlantean navy. They freed the conquered peoples. It was a victory of discipline over luxury, of virtue over arrogance. And then, in a single day and night, it all ended. Earthquakes, floods. The earth opened and swallowed the Athenian army. And Atlantis, the great island, sank beneath the sea. Gone, vanished. The waters closed over it as if it had never existed. Only mud and shoals remained, blocking the passage beyond the Pillars of Hercules, making the ocean there too shallow for ships. Plato tells the story twice, once in the Timaeus, where Critias introduces it briefly, and again in the Critias, where he goes into full detail. The second dialogue breaks off mid-sentence. No one knows why. Perhaps Plato died before finishing. Perhaps the rest was lost. Perhaps he deliberately left it incomplete, a story without an ending, a puzzle without a solution. The text itself is remarkable. Plato writes with the confidence of a historian, yet the content reads like myth. He gives precise measurements. He names real places. He anchors the tale in geography that his audience would recognize. But he also talks about gods, divine births, and sacred geometry. Scholars have argued for centuries about what Plato was doing. Some say he invented the whole thing, a philosophical fable, a warning about the dangers of power. Others say he was recording something real, something passed down from ancient sources, filtered through generations of retelling. Look at the timing. Plato wrote these dialogues near the end of his life, after his own political dreams had failed. He had tried to create a just society in Syracuse. It had collapsed. He had seen democracy corrupt itself in Athens. He had watched his own city lose a war and fall under the rule of tyrants. The Republic, his most famous work, describes an ideal city. The Laws, his last work, describes a practical one. The Atlantis dialogues sit between them, a bridge between the ideal and the real. Maybe Plato used Atlantis as a mirror, a way to show what happens when a society abandons its principles, when success breeds arrogance, when power becomes an end in itself. The Atlanteans had everything. They had wealth, strength, beauty, and divine favor, and they threw it all away. Their fall was not caused by enemies, it was caused by themselves. But the details are so specific, so strange. The concentric rings, the orichalcum, the 9,000 years. Why invent something so elaborate when a simple parable would do? Why construct a geography that can be mapped, measured, and argued over for 2,000 years? The ancient readers took it seriously. Later, Greek and Roman writers debated whether Atlantis was real. Some said yes, some said no, some tried to locate it, some dismissed it as fiction. The debate has never really stopped. There is something about Plato's account that resists easy dismissal. The story has weight. It has texture. It feels like a memory, even if a distorted one. The numbers are too precise. The geography is too coherent. The moral is too sharp. It is the kind of story that gets told again and again, each telling adding a layer, each generation finding something new in it. He wrote it down around 360 BC, but the story itself claims to be 9,000 years older. That is a huge gap. Too huge, most scholars say, for any real historical event to survive intact. Oral traditions do not last that long. They change, they blur, they merge with other stories. 9,000 years is not a memory, it is a myth. But myths are not lies. They are truths wearing costumes. They are the past, distorted by time, reshaped by each retelling. And sometimes, buried inside them, there is a kernel of something real. Plato never says this is a true story. He does not swear by it. He presents it as a tale passed down through generations. He lets his characters vouch for it. He lets his readers decide. And that is exactly what we have been doing ever since. Deciding, arguing, searching. Plato gave us the story, but he also gave us the puzzle. And the puzzle has never been solved. The words sit there on the page, ancient and patient. They describe a city of gold and water, a people of power and pride, a fall that shook the world. They describe an island that sank in a single day and night of misfortune. And somewhere beneath the waves, if the story is true, the ruins still wait. History or allegory, Plato finishes his tale. Atlantis served as the perfect contrast. It was everything Athens should not be: powerful, wealthy, ambitious, and arrogant. It conquered for the sake of conquering. It built its empire on force and fear, and in the end, that appetite destroyed it. This is the allegory. Plato was not writing about a real war. He was writing about the dangers of power, about what happens when a society confuses greatness with greed, about how hubris, the ancient Greek word for deadly pride, brings down even the mightiest. The Greeks knew this theme well. Their tragedies are full of it. A king rises, a king overreaches, the gods punish him, the audience watches and learns. Plato used the same pattern, but he scaled it up. Instead of a single hero, he wrote about a whole civilization. Instead of a personal flaw, he wrote about a cultural disease. And there is more. Plato believed in a cosmic order. He thought the universe was rational, balanced, and just. When humans disrupted that balance, the universe corrected itself. Atlantis did not just lose a war, it was erased by the earth itself. The sea swallowed it, the ground opened, the punishment fit the crime. This is a warning, not a history. Plato was telling his fellow Greeks, look at what happened to Atlantis. Look at how its hunger for more doomed everything it had built. Be careful. Do not become that. The timing matters too. Plato wrote these dialogues after Athens had lost its empire, after decades of war with Sparta had drained its strength, after the city had fallen from its golden age. His audience knew the cost of imperial ambition firsthand. They did not need to be told the story of a real Atlantis. They needed to be shown why their own story had gone wrong. So, the allegory reading makes sense. It fits Plato's methods, it fits his themes, it fits the cultural moment. But the other reading still refuses to die, because Plato insisted on details. He gave measurements, he described the layout of the city, he listed the number of ships, the size of the army, the width of the canals. He named kings and traced their bloodlines. He described the Temple of Poseidon with its golden statues and its walls plated with orichalcum, a mysterious metal that has never been clearly found. Why would a philosopher invent all of that? Why would he burden a moral fable with the weight of fake places and spaces? Some scholars argue he would not. They point to Plato's style. He was precise. He loved structure. When he wrote about the ideal city in the Republic, he gave it a plan. When he wrote about the origins of the universe in Timaeus, he described it in geometric terms. Atlantis fits this pattern. Not proof of reality, but proof of Plato's approach to writing. Others push back. They say Plato knew the difference between myth and history in his other works. If he presented Atlantis as a true story, perhaps he believed it was. Perhaps he had access to sources we no longer have. Perhaps the Egyptian priests really did pass down a memory of a great sea power that vanished. But even if that were true, Plato would have shaped the story to his ends. He was not above editing the past to make a point. His version of ancient Athens, for example, has no basis in any known historical record. He made it up to serve his argument. If he did that for Athens, he could have done it for Atlantis too. Here is the tension. Plato may have started with a seed of truth, a memory of a real disaster, passed down through generations, altered by time, a volcanic burst, a tsunami, a kingdom lost, and then he took that seed and grew it into a towering story, filling it with meaning, loading it with warning. The seed does not make the story true. The story does not make the seed false. We are left with a puzzle, and it is a puzzle Plato likely meant to leave behind. Because Plato wanted his readers to ask questions. He wanted them to think about what is real and what is true. He knew that a story can carry truth even when it did not happen. He also knew that a story can deceive when it's taken too literally. Consider his other famous image, the cave. In the Republic, Plato describes prisoners chained in a dark cave, watching shadows on the wall. They believe the shadows are reality. One prisoner breaks free, sees the sun, and realizes the truth. He returns to tell the others, but they do not believe him. The cave is not a real place. No one thinks Plato meant it literally. It is a metaphor for ignorance and enlightenment, and yet it has shaped Western thought for over 2,000 years. Atlantis may be the same kind of thing. Not a place, but an idea. Not a memory, but a mirror. A reflection held up to the audience, asking them to see themselves in the fall of a great civilization. The allegory reading says, stop looking for the sunken city. Start looking at the warning. And the warning is simple. Empires fall when they forget their limits. Wealth without wisdom is a trap. Power without justice is a poison. A society that measures its success by its conquests will eventually be conquered by its own hunger. Plato saw this in Athens. He saw it in Persia. He saw it in every great power that had risen and crumbled. And he wrote Atlantis as a lasting lesson, a story so vivid that it would survive the ages, forcing every generation to face the same truth. But here is the irony. The lesson may have worked too well. Plato wanted to teach. Instead, he created a mystery. He wanted to warn. Instead, he inspired a hunt. The allegory became a legend. The legend became a question. And the question has never stopped growing. So we stand at a fork in the path. One direction says Atlantis is thought wearing the mask of history. The other says Atlantis is history wearing the mask of thought. Both paths have been walked by brilliant minds. Both paths have produced books, arguments, and journeys. Plato never tells us which path is right, and maybe that is the point. He leaves the door open. He invites us to choose. He lets us decide what to believe. But his own words offer a hint. Near the end of the Critias, he wrote that the story was told according to the account of the lawgiver. A small phrase, easy to miss, but it suggests that even Plato saw his tale through a lens, not as pure fact, not as pure fiction, but as something shaped by human hands, carrying human meaning. The debate will go on. Scholars will argue, adventurers will search, and Plato, from his distant place in history, will keep his silence. He gave us the story. The rest is up to us. The Minoan theory. And in the early 20th century, a man named Sir Arthur Evans walked through with a shovel. Evans was digging on the island of Crete in 1900. Beneath the soil lay a palace complex so vast, so sophisticated, that it rewrote the history books overnight. He called the civilization that built it Minoan, after the legendary King Minos of Greek myth. The palace at Knossos was a maze of corridors, bright frescoes, and advanced plumbing. This civilization, so advanced for its time, vanished. The people, the trade, the art, all of it collapsed in a way that felt sudden. What could wipe out an entire civilization so completely that even its memory faded to myth? The answer, they believe, lies on a small island 100 kilometers north of Crete, and beneath its calm, whitewashed villages lies the scar of one of the most violent events in human history. This was a blast so powerful that it tore the island apart from the inside. The center of Thera collapsed into the sea, leaving a crescent-shaped caldera where solid land once stood. Tsunamis generated by the collapse raced outward at hundreds of kilometers an hour. Crete was in the direct path. Its northern coastline faced Thera like an open palm, because the Minoans, as far as we can tell, were not conquered by an enemy. There are no signs of a burning city, no mass graves from a battle. What they left behind looks more like a people who simply lost everything at once. Their fields were poisoned with ash, their harbors were destroyed, their trade routes, the arteries of their wealth, were severed because the merchants who sailed those routes were gone. The Minoan civilization did not die in a single day. It took decades, maybe a generation. But the blow that broke its back was that eruption. And when you read Plato's description of Atlantis sinking in a single day and night of misfortune, the timing is oddly convenient. A catastrophe of that scale, passed down through generations of oral tradition, could easily morph into a tale of a land swallowed by the sea. Plato says Atlantis existed 9,000 years before his own time. That would put it around 9600 BC. The Minoan eruption happened around 1600 BC. That is a gap of 8,000 years. It is a gap that no amount of storytelling can easily bridge. Some say Plato was not being precise. The number 9,000, they argue, might be symbolic, or it might be a translation error. The Egyptians, who supposedly passed the story to Solon, used a different calendar system. What if the numbers were misread somewhere along the line? This explanation sounds clean. Scholars who favor it point to the similarities between the disaster and the tale as reason enough to accept the loose dating. But here's the honest part. This translation error solution remains a minority view among historians and classicists. Most scholars see it as a hopeful bridge across a chasm that has never truly been crossed. The chronological gap persists as a serious problem, unresolved and heavily disputed. To accept the Minoan theory, you must accept that either Plato was careless with numbers or that something we do not yet understand about ancient sources has led us astray. Neither option sits perfectly. Plato tells us that Atlantis had a powerful navy. He tells us it launched an attack against Athens and Egypt. The Minoans, we know, were a seafaring people. Their ships dominated the Mediterranean for centuries. They had colonies on nearby islands. They traded with Egypt, with the Levant, with the distant shores of the Aegean. If any ancient civilization fit the description of a naval superpower, it was them. The Minoans were also the victims of a catastrophe. So, how does a civilization that was destroyed become the inspiration for a story about an aggressor who was punished its arrogance? The answer lies in how a real event, filtered through generations of telling, can become something else entirely. The eruption of Thera was real. The collapse of the Minoans was real. That struck Crete was real. But the story that came out of it, the story that Plato wrote down, is not a newspaper report. It is a legend. And legends do not preserve facts, they preserve meaning. There is another detail that fits. Plato describes Atlantis as a place with concentric rings of water and land, a circular city built around a central island. And here's the strange part. Thera, before it exploded, was a circular island. Its center was a volcanic cone, surrounded by a ring of land. If you looked at it from above, it would have resembled exactly the kind of layout Plato describes. Some researchers have even suggested that the Minoan city of Akrotiri, buried in ash on Santorini, was the model for the lost capital. It was a wealthy, sophisticated settlement. It had multi-story buildings, advanced drainage, and vibrant frescoes. It was, in every sense, a jewel of the ancient world. And then it was buried under meters of pumice, preserved like Pompeii, waiting for someone to dig it up. The parallels are striking, but they are not proof, and the theory has its critics. The biggest objection remains the date. 9,000 years is a long time. It is hard to imagine a memory surviving that long with any accuracy. The Minoan theory requires us to believe that Plato either made a mistake or was speaking loosely about his numbers. Some scholars find that hard to accept. Plato was a precise thinker. He chose his words carefully. If he said 9,000 years, perhaps he meant 9,000 years. This objection has weight, and it has never gone away. Another objection is the location. Plato places Atlantis in the Atlantic Ocean beyond the Pillars of Hercules, which we now call the Strait of Gibraltar. Thera is in the Aegean Sea, 1,000 kilometers away. If Plato was describing the Minoan eruption, why would he move the island to the other side of the world? Why would he change the geography so completely? The answer, say supporters of the theory, is that he was not writing geography, he was writing philosophy. The location was a device. It served his argument. He wanted to tell a story about a great power that overreached and was humbled by the gods. The specifics, the exact island, the exact date, mattered less than the lesson. So he moved the island, he stretched the timeline, he made the story serve his purpose. And that perhaps is the most honest way to understand the Minoan theory. It is not a solution to the mystery. It is a possible origin. It is a window into how real disasters become myths. The eruption of Thera was a defining event of the Bronze Age world. It shook the Mediterranean, it toppled a civilization. It must have left a profound mark on the people who witnessed it. And it's entirely plausible that over the centuries that mark grew into the legend of Atlantis. But the story does not end with the Minoans. Because the eruption of Thera, as devastating as it was not the only catastrophe to strike the ancient world. In the centuries that followed, the entire Mediterranean system began to crumble. Cities fell. Empires vanished. The world that the Minoans knew and the world that came after them was heading toward a collapse so complete that it would take centuries to recover. And in that collapse, another piece of the Atlantis puzzle may be hiding. That, however, is a story for another time. For now, the volcano sleeps, the ash has settled, and the Minoans, once a thriving civilization, remain a mystery wrapped in a legend, waiting for someone to separate the two. The Sea Peoples and Bronze Age collapse. The Nile ran red. The Sea Peoples were broken. But here's the thing. Even as Egypt claimed victory, the world around it was dying. The Hittite Empire, once the great rival of Egypt, simply vanished. Its capital, Hattusa, was burned and abandoned. The great city of Ugarit, a thriving trade hub on the Syrian coast, sent a desperate plea to a neighboring king. My father, behold, the enemy's ships came here. My cities were burned, and they did evil things in my country. Does my father not know that all my troops and chariots are in the land of Hatti, and all my ships are in the land of Lucca? Thus, the country is abandoned to itself. May my father know it. The 7 ships of the enemy that came here inflicted much damage upon us. The message was never answered. Ugarit fell. The city was destroyed so completely that its name was forgotten for over 3,000 years. The same fate awaited city after city. Alalak destroyed, Carchemish burned, Troy leveled. The Mycenaean palaces of Greece, Mycenae, Tiryns, Pylos, all went up in flames. The great civilization of the Bronze Age, which had flourished for centuries, collapsed in a single generation. Literacy disappeared, trade routes died, populations plummeted. It was a dark age that would last for centuries. What caused this catastrophe? Historians have argued for over a century. Some blame the sea peoples themselves, seeing them as the primary agents of destruction. Others point to a cascade of disasters: earthquakes, famines, droughts, internal revolts. Climate change may have played a role. Tree ring data from around 1200 BC shows a period of severe drought. The Hittites, who depended on agriculture, starved. The Mycenaeans, who relied on complex trade networks, could not adapt. The system was fragile. One shock could bring it down. But instead of one shock, there were many. And at the center of it all, there is a question that haunts the story. Where did the sea peoples come from? And why did they move with such purpose, such aggression? For some, the answer lies in the legend of Atlantis. You see, in Plato's account, the Atlanteans were a powerful naval force that attacked the eastern Mediterranean. They came from beyond the Pillars of Hercules, what we now call the Strait of Gibraltar. They conquered lands in Libya and Egypt. They threatened the very heart of the ancient world. And then, in a single day and night, their islands sank beneath the sea and their armies were swallowed by the waves. Now, consider the sea peoples. They came from the sea. They attacked Egypt. They destroyed kingdoms. And then, after their defeat at the hands of Ramesses III, they disappeared from the historical record. The Pelasets settled in the Levant, where they became the Philistines. The Shurden may have served as mercenaries for the Egyptians, but the rest, they vanish. No one knows where they went. Could the sea peoples have been the Atlanteans? It is a tantalizing idea. Both were seafaring aggressors. Both threatened the established order of the Mediterranean. Both met their end in a wave of destruction. However, this remains an unproven hypothesis with no direct archaeological link connecting the two. The parallels are not perfect. The Atlanteans were a single civilization, a mighty empire. The sea peoples were a loose coalition of different groups, likely from different regions. The Atlanteans attacked from the west. The sea peoples seem to have come from multiple directions, including the Aegean and the Levant. Still, the connection is worth pondering. The Bronze Age collapse was a time of endings. The old world fell apart. The new world that rose from the ashes was different, darker, poorer, more isolated. The memory of what had been lost lingered in the minds of the survivors. They told stories of great cities and powerful kings, of a golden age that had come to a sudden and violent end. These stories were passed down through generations, changing with each telling. By the time they reached the Greeks, they had become legends. And one of those legends was Atlantis. Plato wrote his account in the 4th century BC, 800 years after the events of the Bronze Age collapse. He claimed to have heard the story from Solon, who heard it from Egyptian priests, who claimed it was recorded in their ancient temples. The details he provides, the naval power, the aggression, the war against the eastern Mediterranean, echo the real events of the 13th century BC. The names are different, the geography is exaggerated, but the core narrative resembles a distant memory of historical upheaval. Could Plato have been describing the sea peoples? It is possible, but Plato may have been doing something more subtle. He may have been using a real historical memory, the Bronze Age collapse, the invasions, the chaos, as the foundation for a philosophical lesson. The Atlanteans were not just a historical people. They were a warning. They represented the dangers of hubris, of imperial overreach, of forgetting the gods. Their destruction was not just a historical event. It was a moral judgment. So as we stand at the edge of this mystery, we must ask ourselves, what do we truly know? The sea peoples are real. The Bronze Age collapse is real. The destruction of the great civilizations is real. But the connection to Atlantis remains speculative. It is a thread that leads us deeper into the labyrinth, but it does not yet lead us to the center. The world that fell in 1200 BC was not rebuilt, it was replaced. The Greeks who emerged from the Dark Ages had only fragments of the past: ruins, stories, names. They looked at the crumbling walls of Mycenae and wondered at the giants who must have built them. They listened to tales of the great flood and the lost city and wondered if such things could be true. They passed these stories down, and each generation added its own layer. And so the legend grew. The sea peoples became the Atlanteans. The Bronze Age collapse became the wrath of the gods. The destruction of a civilization became a lesson for all time. The truth, whatever it was, became something else entirely. It became a myth. And myths, as they say, are not lies. They are truths wrapped in stories. The question now is where to look next. The Mediterranean has offered its theories. The Greeks and the Egyptians have offered their stories. But there are other places to search, other maps to study, other depths to explore. The Atlantic Ocean stretches wide and deep, its floor hiding secrets that have not seen the light of day for millennia. Some believe the answer lies there, in the cold and the dark, beneath the waves. But that is a story for another time. For now, we must sit with what we have learned. The Bronze Age collapse was real. The sea peoples were real. Their destruction was real. And yet, the mystery endures. The more we learn, the more we realize how much we do not know. The past is a foreign country, and Atlantis, wherever it lies, remains just beyond our reach. Atlantis in the Atlantic. He estimated its size at roughly the dimensions Plato described. He called it Atlantis. Skeptics pushed back. The river valleys, they argued, could be natural channels formed by underwater currents. The sediment layers had other explanations. The manganese crusts, well, those could form underwater too. Girov's evidence was suggestive, not conclusive, but it planted a seed, and that seed grew. In the 1960s and 70s, oceanographers mapped the Atlantic floor with sonar. The results were remarkable. The Mid-Atlantic Ridge proved to be a massive underwater mountain range, stretching from Iceland to the South Atlantic. Around the Azores, it widened dramatically, a broad elevated zone known as the Azores Plateau. Here's what the maps showed. The plateau rises steeply from the deep ocean floor, then levels out into a relatively flat expanse. Its edges are marked by steep drop-offs, what geologists call escarpments. These look to some eyes like ancient shorelines, like the coasts of a drowned land. The plateau's geology also revealed features that sparked debate. Its crust is thicker than typical oceanic crust. It behaves more like continental crust, the kind that forms land masses. Mainstream geology attributes this to volcanic activity. When a mantle plume, a hotspot, sits beneath the region, it pushes up vast amounts of magma, thickening the crust. Over time, the crust cools and sinks, but it retains its thicker land-like character. This is the consensus view among most geologists. But fringe researchers saw something else. They proposed the Azores Plateau as a fragment of a larger landmass, stretched and thinned by tectonic forces, a piece of a lost continent, stranded beneath the waves. This interpretation remains outside mainstream science. Plate tectonics shows that continents don't simply sink. The ocean floor is young, geologically speaking, constantly created at mid-ocean ridges and destroyed at subduction zones. A continent-sized landmass cannot vanish without leaving traces in the crust. The standard explanation, volcanic hotspot activity, fits the evidence without invoking a lost civilization. Still, the plateau is unusual. Beyond typical ocean floor, it carries the signature of thick crust. It could have supported land in the distant past. The ocean floor around the Azores also holds another detail, the Great Meteor Seamount. This is a massive underwater mountain, roughly 60 miles across, rising from the deep ocean floor. Its summit sits about 300 feet below the surface. During the last ice age, it would have been a large island, perhaps 40 miles long and 20 miles wide. The Great Meteor Seamount is named for the German research vessel that surveyed it in the 1930s. But its significance goes beyond a name. It demonstrates a simple geological fact. Large islands existed in the Atlantic during the Ice Age, and they sank as sea levels rose. The Azores themselves tell the same story. Each island is volcanic. Each has risen from the sea, erupted, eroded, and in some cases subsided. The archipelago is unstable. Islands appear and disappear over geological timescales. Could a larger landmass have existed here? A landmass big enough to support a civilization? The geology doesn't rule it out. The plateau is vast. The water depths are shallow. Conditions were right for a substantial island during the last ice age. And then the ice melted. As the ice sheets retreated, sea levels rose. In some regions, the weight of the melting ice also caused the land to rebound or to sink, depending on the local geology. Around the Azores, the crust was already cooling and subsiding. Rising seas compounded the effect. The result, a gradual, relentless flooding. Coastal plains disappeared. Islands shrank. Communities, if any existed, would have been forced inland, then to higher ground, then to the highest peaks. Eventually, the peaks themselves became islets. And then they vanished beneath the waves. This process would have taken centuries, even millennia, not a single day and night as Plato described. But consider how memory works. A slow catastrophe experienced over generations compresses in the telling. Grandparents tell grandchildren about lost lands. The stories grow more dramatic with each retelling. Eventually, a long decline becomes a sudden disaster. And there's another possibility: rapid sea level rise events. Paleoclimatologists have identified periods when sea levels jumped dramatically in short spans, sometimes several feet in a single century. These pulses, caused by the sudden collapse of ice sheets, could have produced catastrophic flooding. A low-lying island could have been overwhelmed in a single generation, perhaps even in a single season. The Atlantic theory faces serious objections. A continent-sized landmass cannot vanish without leaving traces in the crustal record that modern geology would detect. But the Azores Plateau isn't continent-sized. It's large, but not that large, maybe 200,000 square miles of shallow seafloor. Plato described Atlantis as larger than Libya and Asia combined. That's vague. Ancient geography was imprecise. But it suggests something substantial, something that could have been a significant landmass by ancient standards. Modern geology doesn't support a sunken continent in the Atlantic, but it does support the existence of sunken islands, large islands, islands that could have hosted communities, agriculture, even cities. The question is whether any of them hosted a civilization worthy of the Atlantis legend. That remains unanswered. Ocean floor mapping continues to improve. Modern sonar can resolve features just a few feet across, even in deep water. Researchers have mapped the Azores Plateau in increasing detail. They found more seamounts, more escarpments, more features that resemble drowned landscapes. Some of these features are natural: volcanic cones, lava flows, sediment ridges. But others are harder to classify: linear structures that look like walls, rectangular depressions that resemble quarries, patterns that don't quite match known geological formations. None of these have been confirmed as human-made. The resolution is too coarse for certainty, but they keep the mystery alive. The Azores themselves have yielded artifacts: Roman amphorae, supposedly found off the coast of one island; Carthaginian coins reportedly discovered in a cave. These finds are disputed. Their provenance is unclear, and critics suspect hoaxes. But they've fueled speculation. If ancient ships reached the Azores, then the Atlantic wasn't an impassable barrier. It was a route. And if it was a route, then the islands beyond, the Azores Plateau, the Great Meteor Seamount, the shallow banks of the mid-Atlantic might have been waypoints, staging grounds, perhaps even homes. The Atlantic theory will never be proven by a single artifact or a single sonar image. It requires a convergence of evidence. Geology must show that land existed. Archaeology must show that people lived there. History must show that their memory survived. We have the first piece, tentatively. The geology of the Azores Plateau is consistent with a former landmass, though mainstream science attributes the plateau to volcanic processes rather than a lost continent. We don't have the second piece, no confirmed human settlement beneath the Atlantic waves. And the third piece, the survival of memory, is exactly what Plato claimed. Maybe that's enough. Maybe the search itself is the story. The Atlantic is vast, dark, and deep. It hides its secrets well. But every year, new technology reveals more of its floor. Every year, the maps grow clearer. Somewhere beneath those waves, waiting for the right discovery, lies an answer. Whether it's a natural formation or a lost civilization, the Atlantic holds more questions than answers. The plateau rises from the depths, the escarpments trace ancient shorelines, the seamounts mark vanished islands. The search has only just begun. The Antarctic Enigma. Somewhere beyond the ocean's reach, another possibility waited. One buried not under water, but under ice. The coldest continent on Earth holds nearly 90% of the world's fresh water. It rises miles high in places, a frozen fortress that has not felt sunlight in millions of years. And yet some say beneath that crushing weight lies the answer. Not just any map, a piece of parchment that has haunted historians since it surfaced in a library in 1929. The Piri Reis map, named after the Ottoman admiral who sketched it in 1513, depicts coastlines with startling precision, but it is the bottom portion that stirs the imagination. There, drawn in careful ink, lies a landmass that resembles Antarctica, without its ice. The ice has covered it for at least 15 million years. How could a 16th century cartographer know the shape of a continent hidden beneath a mile of frozen water? The map's own marginal notes claim it was compiled from older sources, some dating back to Alexander the Great's era. If those sources existed, then someone, somewhere, once sailed to a place that should have been inaccessible. This single artifact spawned an entire school of thought. If Antarctica was once free of ice, the reasoning goes, then it was habitable. If it was habitable, then a civilization could have thrived there. And if that civilization existed, well, what would you call a great island nation that sank beneath the waves? Charles Hapgood, a professor and historian, devoted years to studying ancient maps. He argued that the Piri Reis map and others like it pointed to a vanished world. His 1953 book, Maps of the Ancient Sea Kings, proposed that a global ice age had once locked Antarctica's waters in deep freeze, while the continent itself remained temperate. When the ice finally advanced, it swallowed everything in its path. Hapgood found an unlikely supporter in Albert Einstein. The great physicist wrote the foreword to one of Hapgood's later works, praising the theory as worthy of serious examination. That endorsement gave the idea credibility, and it still echoes through every documentary, every forum post, every late-night YouTube rabbit hole. In the 1960s, researchers examining ice cores from Antarctica made a discovery. Deep beneath the surface, in layers dating back roughly 12,000 years, they found traces of plant life, pollen grains, evidence that the continent's interior was once green and alive. Here's where the story demands caution. This pollen finding triggered a cascade of bold claims. 12,000 years ago, the last ice age was ending. Sea levels were rising. The world was in chaos. Theorists saw alignment, a perfect timeline for Atlantis to have existed and been destroyed. But this is where the evidence and the speculation part ways. Modern crustal displacement theory, the idea that the Earth's outer shell suddenly lurches, moving entire continents thousands of miles in moments, contradicts everything plate tectonics has established. The Earth's rotation is stabilized by the moon. The crust does not shift violently. It moves at speeds measured in centimeters per year, grinding forward over millions of years. A catastrophic pole shift would cause earthquakes so violent they would reshape every mountain range on the planet and leave unmistakable evidence in rock layers worldwide. We find no such evidence. The pollen in Antarctic ice cores tells a different story than the one enthusiasts constructed. Antarctica has been covered in ice for roughly 34 million years. The continent drifted south over geological time, not in a sudden lurch. 12,000 years ago, the ice was actually more extensive than today, not less. The pollen grains came from Antarctica's distant past, when it occupied warmer latitudes millions of years before humans walked the Earth. The Piri Reis map itself bears closer scrutiny. The southern landmass might be a rough sketch of the actual South American coast, distorted by the map's projection method. Early cartographers often drew hypothetical continents based on guesswork and balance. If there was land in the north, they reasoned, there must be land in the south to keep the world steady. The map's southern section was never meant to be an accurate rendering of Antarctica at all. Yet the mystery of how these maps arrived at their forms lingers. Why do ancient sources point toward a southern continent before its official discovery? The answer lies in educated guessing, not lost knowledge. Centuries before Antarctica was reached, philosophers and mapmakers assumed a great southern landmass must exist to balance the northern continents. They were right by accident, not by evidence. In the 1970s, a team claimed to have found a pyramid-like structure poking through the ice. Photographs circulated. Excitement built. Then satellite imagery revealed it was just a mountain peak with a peculiar shape. In 2016, an online community buzzed about a massive structure spotted on Google Earth. It appeared as a dark, rectangular shape buried in the ice. Speculation ran wild. The government was hiding something, an ancient base, a crashed UFO, a doorway to the lost civilization. The explanation? An ice crevice. The same way clouds form faces, ice forms patterns. The human mind finds meaning in randomness. Yet the question persists. Why do ancient maps hint at a southern continent? Could there be a thread of truth woven through the speculation, however thin? The honest answer is we do not know. The maps remain unexplained. The ice remains thick. The mystery endures. What we do know is that Antarctica was once warmer. Fossil records show forests growing there in its distant past, dinosaurs roamed its valleys, the continent drifted to its current position over millions of years, carried by plate tectonics. This is a slow, grinding journey measured in deep time, not a catastrophic shift. Every year, new radar surveys map the bedrock beneath the frozen surface. Every year, the picture grows clearer, and every year, no city appears, no temples, no roads, just rock and ice and the silence of a continent that has never known human footsteps. Perhaps that is the true secret of Antarctica. Not that it hides Atlantis, but that it serves as the perfect canvas for our deepest yearnings. Its whiteness is a void. A void invites filling. We fill it with mysteries that feel older than time itself. The maps still exist, the questions still linger. And somewhere, in a remote research station, a scientist might glance at a radar image and notice something, just for a moment, that does not quite belong. The Antarctic enigma endures not because it can be solved, but because it refuses to be dismissed. It sits at the edge of the world, wrapped in white, waiting. And in that waiting, we find something we cannot quite name. Or maybe, just maybe, we find what we are searching for all along. The Baltic Sea Anomaly, Part 8. The Baltic Sea Anomaly. The Antarctic ice holds its secrets close. But the ocean floor? That's a different story entirely. In 2011, a Swedish salvage team called Ocean X was scanning the Baltic Sea. They were looking for shipwrecks, treasure, something worth the cold, dark water. What they found would spark a global mystery. The sonar image showed something massive, round, nearly 200 feet across, sitting on the seabed between Sweden and Finland, nearly 300 feet below the surface. It looked like a mushroom or a spaceship. The team called it the anomaly. And almost immediately, the world called it something else, an alien craft, a lost UFO, a gateway to another dimension. But here's the thing about sonar images. They're grainy, blurry, like looking at a photograph taken in the dark with a shaky hand. The Ocean X team knew this. They also knew that their equipment had picked up something unusual, something heavy, something that dragged their instruments off course. So they went back. Divers plunged into the freezing water, cameras rolled, and what they captured only deepened the puzzle. The object had a strange staircase-like structure on top, a long trail behind it like a runway, rocks that didn't look natural, a shape that seemed too perfect to be random. The divers described it as a giant mushroom rising from the seabed, black, foreboding, surrounded by a strange calm. But here's what the skeptics pointed out. The Baltic Sea is young. Geologically speaking, it's a baby, born from the last ice age when glaciers carved deep trenches and then melted, flooding the land. Any civilization that built something that large would have left traces: tools, writing, bones, cities. None of that exists on the Baltic floor. Still, the images were compelling. And the internet did what the internet does. It ran wild. Some said it was a German anti-submarine net from World War II, a massive concrete barrier designed to stop enemy vessels. The Baltic was a battleground. Ships sank by the hundreds. Debris littered the depths. Others pointed to natural geology, glacial deposits, drift ice. The same forces that carved the fjords could have shaped this odd formation. Then there were the fringe theories, the ones that whispered about sunken outposts of a lost civilization, about a people that thrived during the last ice age when sea levels were lower, when the Baltic Basin was dry land. Could the anomaly be a remnant of that forgotten world? Let's look at the science. The Baltic Sea is shallow. Average depth? About 180 feet. But in some places it plunges much deeper. The anomaly sits in one of those deep pockets near the Gulf of Bothnia. The seabed there is made of glacial clay, soft, sedimentary, perfect for preserving shapes that sink into it. A trawler's net, weighted down and dragged across the bottom, could create a long furrow, A boulder dropped by a melting iceberg could create a circular depression. Over thousands of years, sediment could build up around these features, creating structures that look engineered. This is called pareidolia, the human brain's tendency to see patterns in randomness. We see faces in clouds, animals in rock formations, and in a grainy sonar image, we see a spaceship. But the Ocean X team wasn't satisfied with that explanation. They returned to the site multiple times. Each visit produced more questions. The object seemed to be surrounded by a dark material, like soot, like something had burned. The divers reported that their electronic equipment malfunctioned near the object. Compasses spun, cameras died. Is this proof of something anomalous? Or just the quirks of deep sea diving in cold, murky water? The truth is, we don't know. And that uncertainty is exactly what makes the Baltic Sea anomaly so fascinating. Here's what we do know. The Baltic region has a rich history. The Vikings sailed these waters, trade routes crossed them, wars were fought over them. But the Viking era began around 800 AD. The Baltic's human history goes back much further. Stone Age settlements have been found along its shores. Hunter gatherers lived here when the sea was smaller, when what is now ocean was once forest and grassland. As the glaciers retreated, the land rebounded. It rose, and sometimes it sank. Areas that were once dry became flooded. Ancient forests were submerged. Stone Age villages vanished beneath the waves. Could a more advanced civilization have existed here? One that predates what we know? The evidence says no. There are no records of such a civilization. No artifacts, no structures that match the engineering required for a 200-foot diameter construction. But the absence of evidence is not evidence of absence. That's a phrase you'll hear often in the search for lost civilizations. It's a comforting thought, a way to keep the mystery alive, and the Baltic Sea anomaly feeds that mystery. It sits there in the cold dark, refusing to explain itself. Geologists have offered the most likely explanation. The object is probably a glacial deposit, a piece of rock or sediment shaped by ice and time. The staircase is likely a natural formation. The runway is likely a drag mark from where the object was pulled along the seabed. In 2019, researchers from Stockholm University analyzed samples from the site. Their conclusion: the anomaly is most likely a glacial deposit, a remnant of the Ice Age, nothing more. But the Ocean X team disagreed. They pointed to the structure's composition, the unusual shape, the way it seemed to rise from the seabed rather than rest on it. The debate continues, and that's the point. The Baltic Sea anomaly is not proof of anything, really, except that the ocean is vast and mysterious, that we've mapped less than 20% of the seafloor, that there are places on Earth where our knowledge runs out, and in those places the imagination takes over. We want the anomaly to be something. We want it to be a doorway to a lost world, a remnant of a civilization that rose and fell before history was written. Because that would mean the story isn't over, that there are chapters we haven't read yet. But here's what the anomaly really is: a reminder, a nudge. The ocean holds more questions than answers. Every sonar scan could reveal something new. Every dive could uncover a piece of the past we didn't know existed. The Baltic Sea anomaly is just one of those questions, a round, dark shape on a muddy seabed, a shape that could be a rock, could be a wreck, could be something else entirely. We may never know for sure. And maybe that's okay, because the search for the unknown is what drives us forward. It's what sent explorers across oceans, what sends scientists into the deep, what makes us look at a blurry image and wonder, what if? The Baltic Sea anomaly doesn't have the answers, but it asks the question, and sometimes the question is enough. The sea keeps its secrets, but every once in a while it gives us a glimpse, a shadow, a shape in the dark, a mystery that refuses to be solved. And that's exactly what keeps us looking. The Eye of the Sahara. Because there's another place on Earth that has captured the imagination of Atlantis hunters. Perhaps it was about a city that was destroyed by a flood, a massive wave, a tsunami, something that would have wiped out the civilization but left the land itself intact. In that reading, the Eye of the Sahara could be the remnant of a once thriving port city that was devastated by a catastrophic natural event. The theory gained momentum in the early 2010s. Satellite images made the eye more accessible than ever before. Anyone with an internet connection could zoom in on the structure and see its remarkable symmetry. And once people saw it, the comparisons to Plato's description began to multiply. Plato said the Atlantean capital had a central island. The eye has a central dome of rock. Plato described concentric rings of water. The eye's rings are separated by ridges that could have held water. Plato said the city was connected to the sea by a canal. The eye sits near a dry riverbed that once flowed toward the Atlantic. Each detail seemed to click into place, and the theory spread like wildfire. But the geological story of the Richat structure tells a very different tale. The eye is not a crater, it's not a meteorite impact, it's not the remains of a volcano. It's a geological dome, a massive bulge of rock that was pushed upward by the pressure of molten magma beneath the Earth's crust. Over millions of years, wind and water eroded the dome. The softer layers wore away first. The harder layers remained. What's left is a series of concentric ridges that look man-made, but are entirely natural. The structure has been known to geologists since the 1940s. It was first photographed from space during the Gemini missions in the 1960s. And from those early days, it was understood as a textbook example of a symmetrical uplift structure. Nothing more, nothing less. But the Atlantis connection refuses to die. And it's easy to understand why. Here's the thing about the Eye of the Sahara. It doesn't look like a natural formation. When you see it from above, it looks designed, intentional. The rings are so regular, so perfectly circular, that the human mind immediately searches for a creator. This is a psychological phenomenon known as pareidolia, the tendency to see patterns in random data. The same reason we see faces in clouds and shapes in fire. But there's something else at play here, something deeper. The Eye of the Sahara is one of the most visually striking places on Earth. It's vast, it's mysterious, it's remote, and it's been sitting there for eons, waiting to be noticed. When modern technology finally allowed us to see it from above, it was almost inevitable that we would project our myths onto it. The theory has attracted serious attention too. In 2015, a researcher named Jimmy Corsetti began promoting the eye as the site of Atlantis. His videos gained millions of views. He pointed out that the eye's location matched Plato's description. He argued that the structure's rings could have held water. He suggested that a catastrophic flood could have changed the landscape, and his enthusiasm was contagious. Other researchers joined the chorus. Some pointed to the eye's proximity to ancient trade routes. Others noted that the region was once much wetter than it is today. Around 10,000 years ago, the Sahara was green. Rivers flowed across it, lakes dotted the landscape. Animals grazed where now only sand exists. It's entirely possible that a civilization could have thrived in that region during a wetter period in Earth's history. But here's where the theory hits its biggest obstacle. Plato's timeline doesn't match. Plato said Atlantis existed 9,000 years before the time of Solon. That places the destruction of Atlantis around 9600 BC. But the Eye of the Sahara was not formed 9,000 years ago. It's been there, essentially as we see it now, for hundreds of thousands of years. The erosion that created its distinctive rings happened long before humans walked the earth. So if the Eye was Atlantis, where are the ruins? Where are the artifacts? Where is the evidence of human habitation? Archaeologists have explored the area around the Eye. They've found stone tools. They've found evidence of prehistoric human activity, but nothing that suggests a great civilization. No palaces, no temples, no advanced technology. The region was home to nomadic hunter-gatherers, not the builders of a mighty empire. This is the fundamental problem with the theory. It relies on visual similarity and selective reading of Plato's text. It ignores the geological timeline. It ignores the lack of archaeological evidence. It ignores the fact that Plato's description of Atlantis includes specific details that don't match the eye at all. The plain that surrounded the city, the mountains to the north, the elephants, the exotic minerals. None of these have been found at the Richat structure. But the theory persists. And it persists because it satisfies something in us. It gives us a concrete place to point to. It turns a myth into a location. It makes the impossible feel possible. The Eye of the Sahara is real. It's immense. It's ancient. It's beautiful in a way that defies description. Standing at its edge, you feel small. You feel the weight of deep time pressing down on you. The rings stretch out like the ripples of an enormous stone dropped into a still pond. but the stone was dropped a billion years ago, and the pond has long since dried up. There is a version of this story where the eye was indeed a city, where its rings were canals, where its central dome was an acropolis, where a thriving civilization called this place home before the waters rose and the sands swept in. It's a beautiful story. It captures the imagination. It makes the desert feel alive with possibility, but the evidence doesn't support it. And in the search for Atlantis, that's the constant tension between what we want to be true and what we can prove, between the stories that feel right and the facts that stubbornly refuse to cooperate. The Eye of the Sahara will continue to fascinate. It will continue to attract theorists and dreamers and seekers. It will continue to appear in documentaries and YouTube videos and blog posts. And maybe that's okay, because even if it's not Atlantis, it's something remarkable, a window into the deep past, a reminder that the Earth is full of wonders we haven't fully explained. But the search doesn't end here. The Eye is just one candidate among many, and the story of Atlantis has a way of leading us down unexpected paths. From the sands of Mauritania, the trail winds onward, to ancient maps, to mysterious texts, to other places where the boundary between fact and fiction grows thin. For now, the Eye stares back at the sky, silent, patient, holding its secrets. Whether those secrets include a lost civilization or simply the slow work of wind and water, we may never know. But the question remains, and the search continues. Ancient maps and legends. The Eye of the Sahara stares up at the sky, a silent witness carved in stone, because there's another kind of map, one drawn not on parchment, but in the minds of sailors, scholars, and dreamers. Hold a map from the 1500s and you'll notice something strange. Empty spaces where cartographers simply wrote, "Here be dragons," and moved on. The Piri Reis map. You've probably heard the name. It surfaced in 1929, tucked away in Istanbul's old palace library. A piece of gazelle skin carefully drawn, dated 1513, and below them, a landmass that shouldn't be there. So, how did a Turkish admiral, working from older sources, draw it centuries earlier? The mountains might be the Andes, stretched and bent by the map's projection. The rivers might be fjords in Patagonia and Antarctica. It might not be there at all. But then there's the Orontius Phineas map and the Buach map and others. The pattern persists, ice-free coastlines, river systems, a continent that shouldn't have been known. The debate rages on. Geologists say the land was ice-free too long ago for humans to have mapped it. Historians say no ancient civilization had the technology for such surveys. Conspiracy theorists say that's exactly the point. The evidence was erased, the knowledge was suppressed, the truth was buried under ice and silence. And maybe they're right. Maybe there was a civilization that mapped the world before the ice. Maybe their charts survived, copied and recopied, passed from hand to hand like a secret flame. Maybe the Piri Reis map is a window into that lost world. Or maybe it's just a map, a very old, very beautiful, very imperfect map, drawn by a skilled admiral who used the best sources he had, sources that included guesswork, tradition, and a healthy dose of imagination. Here's what makes this story so compelling. We want the maps to be true. We want there to be a lost civilization hiding beneath the ice, waiting to be found. We want the Piri Reis map to be proof that our ancestors knew more than we give them credit for. Because if the maps are real, then the world is bigger than we thought. History is deeper, and the past isn't a closed book. It's a living mystery. The cartographers who drew these maps believed in a world full of wonder. They filled their parchment with sea monsters and mermaids, with cities of gold and islands of the blessed. They knew there were places they'd never see, truths they'd never verify. So they drew what they imagined. And sometimes what they imagined was astonishingly close to reality. Think about that for a moment. A map is a story. It's a way of organizing the unknown into something we can hold. It's a promise that the world makes sense, that there's a pattern beneath the chaos. And when a map shows something impossible, when it hints at a continent that shouldn't exist, it challenges our sense of order. That's why these maps fuel the Atlantis search, not because they prove anything, but because they suggest. They suggest that the past might be richer than we thought, that knowledge might have existed and been lost, that the legend might have a foundation in something real. The Piri Reis map sits in a museum in Istanbul, carefully preserved, endlessly debated, People travel from around the world to see it. They stand before the glass case and stare at the inked lines. They trace the coast of South America with their eyes. They look for Antarctica. They look for Atlantis. And they find what they're looking for. Because that's what maps do. They show us what we want to see. They give shape to our hopes and fears. They turn the vast, terrifying unknown into something we can trace with a fingertip. The ancient cartographers knew this. They knew that a map was never just a map. It was a vision of the world as it should be, as it could be, as it might have been. They drew the world they knew and the world they dreamed. And sometimes the two overlapped. That's the secret of the ancient maps. They're not just records of geography, they're records of imagination. They show us not only where people went, but where they wished they could go. Not only what they knew, but what they hoped was true. And in that space between knowledge and hope, Atlantis lives. So the next time you see an old map, look closely. Look at the empty spaces, the uncertain coastlines, the decorative flourishes. Look at the way the cartographer struggled to fit the known world onto a page. Look at the places where the ink fades, where the lines blur, where the mapmaker simply gave up and drew a monster. That's where the mystery hides. That's where the legend begins. The Piri Reis map is just one piece of parchment, one snapshot of a world that's gone. But it carries the weight of centuries. It carries the hopes of everyone who's ever looked at it and wondered. It carries the possibility that somewhere, somehow, there's more to our past than we'll ever know. And that possibility is enough to keep the search alive, enough to keep the dreamers dreaming, enough to keep the maps turning up in dusty archives, waiting for someone to notice what they reveal. Because maps don't just show us where we've been. They show us where we might go. They show us what we might find. They show us that the world is still full of secrets, still full of wonder, still full of places where the past and the imagination meet. The ancient maps and legends point to something. Whether that something is a real continent, a real civilization, or just a real human longing, we may never know. But the pointing itself is meaningful. The searching itself is valuable. The wondering itself is beautiful. And that's why we keep looking. That's why we keep tracing the lines on old parchment. That's why we keep asking what the maps might reveal about a world we've lost. The legend of Atlantis is a map, too, a map of our own longing, a map of our own desire to believe that the past holds more than we've discovered, a map of our own hope that somewhere beneath the ice or the waves or the dust of ages, there's a truth waiting to be found. And so we follow the maps. We read the legends. We trace the coastlines of ancient seas. We search for the place where knowledge and imagination meet, because that's where the answer lies, not in the maps themselves, but in what they mean to us. Not in the ink on the parchment, but in the stories we tell about it. The Piri Reis map, the Orontes Phineus map, the Buak map. They're more than just artifacts. They're invitations. They're questions. They're challenges. They ask us to believe that the world is bigger than we think, that the past is deeper than we know, that the truth is stranger than we imagine. And that's a question worth asking. Egyptian connections. Yet those ancient maps themselves raise a deeper question. Where did the source material come from? Who told Plato about Atlantis in the first place? The answer, according to him, traces back to Egypt, to priests in the Temple of Sais who allegedly preserved the story for centuries before a visiting Greek named Solon heard it and brought the tale home. But did those priests really know about a sunken civilization? And if so, how? The story appears only in Plato's dialogues, the Timaeus and the Critias. No earlier source, no independent confirmation. This silence troubles historians. If the story was so important, so devastating, why did no one else record it? Perhaps the records existed, but were lost. The temples of Egypt suffered through invasions, earthquakes, and the slow erosion of time. Libraries burned, papyrus crumbled, the knowledge scattered like sand in the desert wind. Or perhaps the story was never written down at all. Perhaps it was an oral tradition, a tale told within the priesthood, shared only with trusted visitors. Solon might have heard it during his stay. He might have taken notes, planning to write an epic poem, but he never finished it. Other duties called. Time slipped away. There is another possibility, one that scholars find more convincing. Plato may have invented the Egyptian connection as a literary device. In his time, Egypt was seen as the source of ancient wisdom. Greeks respected Egyptian priests as keepers of deep knowledge. By attributing the story to them, Plato gave it authority. He made it feel real, weighty, true. This was a common technique in Greek writing. Plato himself used fictional dialogues to explore philosophical ideas. His Socrates often spoke with imagined characters. The Atlantis story might be just such a fabrication, a myth designed to teach a lesson. But there is something else, something that makes researchers pause. The details Plato gives about Egypt are remarkably accurate. He describes size correctly. He names the goddess Neith, a real deity associated with war and weaving. He mentions the city's location in the delta, its sacred rites, its connection to Athens. These details suggest Plato either visited Egypt himself or had access to reliable sources. He knew what he was writing about. So perhaps the story is a blend, Egyptian history and Greek imagination, woven together into a single thread. The priests may have told Solon about a real threat, perhaps the sea peoples, perhaps the Minoans, perhaps something older. And Plato, writing centuries later, shaped that memory into a grand allegory about power, pride, and downfall. The question of Egyptian technology adds another layer. Ancient Egypt was a marvel. The pyramids of Giza, built around 2560 BC, remain one of the greatest engineering feats in human history. The Great Pyramid contains over 2 million stone blocks, each weighing several tons. The precision is astonishing. The alignment with the cardinal points is nearly perfect. Modern engineers still debate how it was done. Some see this as evidence of lost knowledge, knowledge that might connect to Atlantis. If the Atlanteans were a real advanced civilization, perhaps they shared their skills with Egypt. Perhaps the pyramids are their legacy. Perhaps the great temples, the astronomical knowledge, the mathematical sophistication, all of it came from the sunken island. This idea has fueled countless books, documentaries, and late-night theories. The connection is tantalizing. Egypt appears suddenly in history, fully formed, with complex architecture and advanced understanding. How did a primitive society achieve so much so quickly? But archaeology offers a simpler answer. The Egyptians built gradually. The step pyramid at Saqqara, built around 2670 BC, shows an early attempt at monumental construction. It is clumsy, experimental. Over the next centuries, builders improved. They learned to cut stone more precisely, to move blocks more efficiently, to design more ambitious structures. The Great Pyramid was the culmination of generations of trial and error, not a sudden gift from a lost civilization. The same is true of Egyptian religion. The priests' knowledge grew slowly, shaped by centuries of observation and reflection. Their astronomy tracked the stars, their mathematics measured the floodplains, their medicine treated the sick. All of this developed through practical experience, not inherited wisdom from a sunken land. Still, the connection persists in popular imagination. The idea of a hidden lineage of knowledge passed from Atlantis to Egypt, from Egypt to Greece, from Greece to the modern world, has a powerful appeal. It suggests that we are not alone in our achievements, that others came before us, wiser and more advanced, that their legacy lives on in our temples, our texts, our very way of thinking. Could the Egyptian priests have preserved such a legacy? Perhaps. The priests were the keepers of memory. They recorded everything, the reigns of kings, the floods of the Nile, the movements of the stars. Their temple libraries contained thousands of scrolls, cataloging the knowledge of millennia. When the Greeks came seeking wisdom, the priests shared what they knew. But did they know about Atlantis? There is no physical evidence. No Egyptian text mentions a sunken island. No inscription describes a war between Athens and a great sea power. The Egyptian records that survive, the royal annals, the religious texts, the administrative documents, are silent on the subject. This silence could mean the story was invented, or it could mean the records were lost. The Temple of Sais was destroyed and rebuilt many times. Its library, if it existed, is gone. The papyrus scrolls have decayed into dust. We will never know what they contained. What we do know is that Egypt held a special place in the Greek imagination. The Greeks admired Egyptian wisdom. They borrowed Egyptian art, Egyptian religion, Egyptian science. They told stories of Egyptian priests who possessed secret knowledge, knowledge that could explain the mysteries of the world. The Atlantis story fits this pattern perfectly. Plato gave his readers what they expected. He placed the tale in Egypt, the land of ancient mysteries. He gave it the weight of priestly authority. He made it feel real. But he also used it for his own purposes. The story of Atlantis is a warning about hubris, the pride that comes before the fall. The Atlanteans were powerful, wealthy, and aggressive. They tried to conquer the known world, and they were destroyed. The message is clear: no power lasts forever. No empire is immune to collapse. Egypt is the bridge between the known and the unknown. It is the source of the story, the keeper of the memory. But whether that memory is real or invented, we cannot say with certainty. The evidence is thin. The silence is loud. Perhaps the truth lies somewhere in between. Perhaps the Egyptian priests did tell Solon a story based on real events, embellished by centuries of retelling. Perhaps Plato shaped that story into something greater, something that would outlast its sources. The sands of Egypt still hold secrets. The ruins of Sais still wait beneath the earth. And the question of Atlantis still calls to us across the centuries, from the mouth of the Nile to the depths of the sea. Cross-Atlantic echoes. The similarities to the Atlantis story are striking. In both traditions, a great civilization is destroyed by water. In both, the destruction comes from the gods, a punishment for human pride or corruption. In both, a few survive to carry the memory forward. But the differences are equally important. Plato's Atlantis was a naval power, an empire that sought to conquer the Mediterranean. The flood in Mesoamerican tradition was a cosmic reset, a cleansing of the earth itself. The Atlanteans were punished for their arrogance, for their desire to dominate. The wooden people of the Popol Vuh were punished for their emptiness, for their lack of gratitude. The people of the fourth sun were punished for their failure to honor the gods. These are not the same story, but they speak to the same fear. Water is the great equalizer. It is the element that gives life and takes it away. Every civilization that has ever existed near a river, a lake, or an ocean has known the terror of the rising waters. The flood is not a single event, but a recurring nightmare. It is the memory of every village swept away, every harvest drowned, every child lost to the current. The myths are not inventions. They are the distillation of thousands of years of lived experience, compressed into a single story that can be passed from parent to child. The question is whether these stories share a common source or whether they emerged independently. Did the Maya and the Aztecs inherit their flood legends from a distant ancestor, a culture that existed before the oceans rose and the continents drifted apart? Or did they arrive at the same conclusion on their own, simply by watching the water rise? There is evidence on both sides. Those who argue for a shared source point to the striking similarities between the Mesoamerican flood stories and those of the ancient Near East. The idea of a single couple surviving in a boat, the sending of a bird to find land, the promise that the waters will never again destroy the earth. These elements appear in the Epic of Gilgamesh, in the Book of Genesis, and in the traditions of the Maya and Aztecs. How could so many cultures, separated by oceans and centuries, tell such similar stories? The answer, some say, lies in the last ice age. During that time, sea levels were much lower. Land bridges connected continents that are now separated by water. The Bering Strait was a bridge of grass and tundra. The islands of the Pacific were stepping stones to the Americas. If people could walk, they could travel. If they could travel, they could carry their stories with them. But the journey would have taken generations. The stories would have changed along the way. New details would have been added, old ones forgotten. The flood of the Near East might have become the flood of the Maya, transformed by 1,000 years of telling and retelling. It is possible, but it is not proven. Those who argue for independent development point to the universality of flooding. Every civilization that has ever lived near water has experienced a flood. The Nile floods every year, and the Egyptians built their entire society around its rhythm. The Tigris and Euphrates flooded without warning, and the Mesopotamians lived in constant fear of the waters. The rivers of Mesoamerica were no different. A sudden storm could turn a gentle stream into a raging torrent. A single hurricane could reshape the coastline overnight. When a culture experiences such a disaster, it tells a story about it. The story becomes a warning, a lesson, a way of making sense of the chaos. Over time, the story grows. The flood becomes a flood of cosmic proportions. The village that was destroyed becomes a civilization. The family that survived becomes the ancestors of all humanity. The myth is not a memory of a single event, but a metaphor for the fragility of life itself. The Maya understood this. They built their cities on high ground, away from the floodplains. They developed sophisticated irrigation systems to control the water. They watched the skies for signs of storms and tracked the movements of the stars. Their entire worldview was shaped by the knowledge that the world could end at any moment. They did not need to inherit that fear from another culture. They had only to look at the water around them. But there is another possibility. Perhaps the flood stories are not about water at all. Perhaps they are about something deeper, something that every human being carries within them. Think about it. The flood is a kind of birth. The old world is washed away, and a new one emerges from the water. The survivors are not just refugees, they are the seeds of a new creation. They carry within them the potential for a new world, a world that has learned from the mistakes of the past. The flood is not just a punishment, it is a promise. The Atlanteans were destroyed because they had become corrupt. The wooden people were destroyed because they had no souls. The people of the fourth sun were destroyed because they had forgotten the gods. In every case, the flood is a cleansing. It removes what is broken and makes room for what can be healed. The Maya and the Aztecs did not need the story of Atlantis to understand this. They had their own stories, their own floods, their own gods who demanded better from humanity. But when the Spanish arrived and told them of a great kingdom that had sunk beneath the sea, they must have felt a flicker of recognition. They had heard this story before. They had always known it was true. The search for a shared source may never be resolved. The evidence is too fragmentary, the timelines too uncertain. But perhaps that is the point. The flood stories are not about history. They are about meaning. They tell us who we are and where we come from. They remind us that we are not the first civilization to walk this earth, and we will not be the last. The waters will rise again in some form, in some place. They always do. The question is not whether we will be ready. The question is whether we will be worthy of survival. The Maya had a word for it. They called it the time of the fifth sun, the era of transformation, the age when the old world would pass away and a new one would be born. They did not know when it would come. They only knew that it would. And so they watched the water. They counted the days. They told their children the story of the flood that had come before, so that they would remember what had been lost and what could be saved. The story crossed the ocean long before the ships did. It was carried in the hearts of people who had never seen the sea. It was whispered in languages that would one day be forgotten. It was written in the stars and carved into the stone, and it is still being told. The biblical flood and the lost city. And yet, when you trace these tales back to their oldest known roots, you find yourself standing on the banks of the Tigris and Euphrates rivers. That is where the flood story begins. The clay tablets of Sumer hold the earliest version we know. They tell of a king named Ziusudra. The gods, angered by the noise and chaos of humanity, decide to cleanse the earth with water. But one god, Enki, warns Ziusudra in secret. He instructs him to build a great vessel, to fill it with his family and the seed of all living things. 6 days and 7 nights of relentless rain, and then, as suddenly as it began, the waters recede. Ziusudra's boat comes to rest on a mountain. The gods, hungry and regretful, smell the sweet smoke and bless him. This story predates the biblical account by centuries. It was already ancient when the Hebrew scribes began shaping their own narrative. In the biblical version, the flood is not a punishment for noise. It is a judgment for violence and corruption. Noah is not saved by the whim of a single God. He is saved because he is righteous. And the covenant that follows is not about granting immortality to one man. It is about promising the whole of humanity that the waters will never again rise. Now consider what this means for Atlantis. Plato's account places the sinking of Atlantis around 9,000 years before his own time. That would put the disaster roughly 11,500 years in our past. The Mesopotamian flood stories, as recorded, describe an event that seems to fit a much later period, but the oral traditions behind them may reach far deeper into time. Both narratives describe a world destroyed by water. Both feature a chosen survivor who receives divine warning. Both carry a moral lesson about human arrogance and divine justice, and both have been found in some form in cultures that never met each other. The Greek flood myth tells of Deucalion and Pyrrha. They survive a deluge sent by Zeus to wipe out the Bronze Age. They build a chest, float for 9 days, and land on Mount Parnassus. From stones thrown over their shoulders, new people spring forth. The Hindu tradition speaks of Manu, who is warned by a fish that the world will be flooded. He builds a boat. The fish tows him to safety. He repopulates the earth. So, what does this mean for Atlantis? Some scholars argue that the flood narratives and the Atlantis story are not separate traditions. They are branches of the same memory, a real catastrophe or series of catastrophes that struck the ancient world. A memory so powerful it embedded itself in the collective psyche of every culture touched by it. Around 12,000 years ago, the last ice age was ending. The great ice sheets were melting. Sea levels were rising rapidly. In some places, the ocean climbed by meters in a single generation. Coastlines that had been home to thriving communities were swallowed whole. The world that people knew was literally drowning. Plato describes Atlantis as an island civilization that sank beneath the sea in a single day and night. He speaks of earthquakes and floods. The language he uses is close to the language of catastrophe, a specific event in a specific place at a specific time. Plato places Atlantis in the Atlantic, beyond the Pillars of Hercules. The Mesopotamian flood stories are set in the land between rivers. Every civilization that lives near a great river or a great sea has experienced flooding. When a culture experiences a flood that destroys everything, it does not forget. Um, the biblical flood and the Atlantean deluge may not be the same event. The Mesopotamian connection is crucial here. This is where the written record begins. This is where we find the oldest flood stories, and this is where we find something else. And then, after the flood, the rains become shorter. He describes it as a civilization of great power and great pride, a civilization that fell because it forgot its values. The same lesson runs through the biblical story of Noah. The Tigris and Euphrates could rise without warning. Flash floods could devastate entire regions. The people who lived there knew the power of water intimately. They knew that life and death were separated by a single bank. In the Atlantic, the flood was tied to the sea, the open ocean, the unknown depths, the places where ships disappeared and no one returned. Plato placed Atlantis there because the Atlantic was the edge of the known world, the place where imagination took over. But the core of the story remains the same. A civilization rises, a civilization falls, and the waters are both the instrument and the witness of its fall. There is another thread worth pulling here. The flood stories of Mesopotamia may have a real historical kernel. Archaeologists have found evidence of massive flooding in the region around 2900 BC. Layers of sediment in the ruins of Ur and Shuruppak show that the cities were buried under a thick deposit of river silt. A flood of catastrophic proportions had swept through the land. Could this have been the flood that inspired the stories? The people of Shuruppak would have experienced it as the end of the world. Their city destroyed, their fields drowned, their neighbors gone. They would have told stories about it. And those stories would have grown. Generations later, the flood became not just a local disaster, but a cosmic event, a judgment from the gods. The same process may have shaped the Atlantis story. If there was a real catastrophe in the Atlantic or the Mediterranean, it would have been remembered, and as it was passed down, it would have been amplified. The island became an empire. The earthquake became a divine punishment. The flood became the end of the world. The biblical flood and the Atlantean deluge stand at the same crossroads. They are stories about the end of things, about the fragility of human achievement, about the thin line between order and chaos. They are also stories about hope, about survival, about the possibility of starting again. Noah steps off the ark onto dry land. The rainbow appears in the sky. The promise is made. Life continues. The survivors of Atlantis, if there were any, leave no such record. Plato does not tell us what happened to them. They disappear. Their civilization sinks beneath the waves, and all that remains is the story. But the story itself is a kind of survival, an echo of something real, a memory carried across centuries. The flood stories of Mesopotamia remind us that the past is not as distant as we think. The same fears, the same hopes, the same questions about why the world falls apart and how we find the strength to rebuild. Atlantis may never be found. The waters may never give up their secret. But the story endures because it speaks to something universal, the knowledge that everything we build can be swept away, and the hope that something of us will remain. A transatlantic empire, but the survivors didn't all die. They scattered. They took their knowledge with them. They landed on the shores of Egypt, where they became the priestly class. They landed in the Americas, where they taught the ancestors of the Maya and the Aztecs. They landed in the Mediterranean, where they seeded the cultures of Greece and Crete. This is the core of the transatlantic empire theory. Not just that Atlantis existed, but that its influence shaped everything that came after. It's a seductive idea. It turns the ancient world into a connected web, rather than a collection of isolated pockets. It gives humanity a shared origin story, a single thread running through all of our histories. The most famous proponent of this idea was Ignatius Donnelly, a 19th century American politician and amateur scholar. In 1882, he published a book called Atlantis, the Antediluvian World. It was a sensation. In it, Donnelly laid out his evidence. He pointed to the similarities between ancient Egyptian and ancient American civilizations. He noted that both cultures built pyramids, both had complex writing systems, both practiced mummification, both had calendars based on astronomical observation. Donnelly argued that these similarities couldn't be coincidence. There had to be a common source, and that source, he insisted, was Atlantis. His book became a cornerstone of the diffusionist movement, and it inspired generations of researchers to look for connections across the Atlantic. Some of them found remarkable things. Take the linguistic evidence. Certain words appear in languages on both sides of the ocean with similar meanings. The word for water in some Native American languages sounds remarkably like the word for water in some ancient Mediterranean languages. Diffusionists point to these as evidence of contact, but linguists offer a different explanation. With thousands of languages and thousands of words, random similarities are statistically bound to occur. It's probability at work. When you search long enough, you find matches. The same logic applies to any two unrelated language families. Then there's the botanical evidence, the sweet potato. It's native to the Americas, yet it was found in Polynesia, thousands of miles away, before European contact. How did it get there? Diffusionists see it as proof of ancient transoceanic travel. Botanists counter that seeds and rootstock could have floated across the ocean on natural rafts of vegetation. Ocean currents carry debris vast distances. Plant life survives such journeys. The evidence supports both routes. Which explanation is more likely depends on how you weigh probability. Consider the practice of trepanation, drilling holes in the skull to relieve pressure or treat injuries. It appears in ancient Peru. It also appears in ancient Greece. The techniques show striking similarities. The survival rates are comparable. Diffusionists see shared knowledge. Mainstream archaeologists see something different. They point out that trepanation solves a practical problem. A surgeon facing a head injury would arrive at the same solution independently. A damaged skull needs relief. Drilling offers that relief. Two cultures separated by oceans could invent the same technique by observing the same human anatomy. The problem with the diffusionist argument runs deeper still. It's nearly impossible to prove and equally difficult to disprove. The evidence remains circumstantial. It depends on patterns and similarities, but patterns mislead us. Similarities hide themselves among noise. The human mind evolved to find connections, to see patterns even where they don't exist. We are pattern-seeking creatures. Sometimes we find what we seek. Yet the theory persists. It persists because it answers a deep human need. The need to believe that we are not alone, that our ancestors were not isolated peoples discovering fire separately, but inheritors of a great lost wisdom. That somewhere, buried beneath the waves or lost to time, lies the key to our past. In the mid-20th century, the diffusionist argument found a new champion. His name was Thor Heyerdahl, a Norwegian explorer convinced that ancient peoples had crossed the oceans long before Columbus. In 1947, he built a raft out of balsa wood and sailed it from Peru to Polynesia. He called it the Kon-Tiki. The journey took 101 days. It proved that such a voyage was possible. It demonstrated human capability. but it didn't prove that such voyages had actually occurred in antiquity. Possibility differs from evidence. Heyerdahl wasn't specifically looking for Atlantis, but his work lent credibility to the idea that ancient peoples were capable of long-distance ocean travel. Other researchers followed. They studied ocean currents, they studied wind patterns, they built replica ships and sailed them across the Atlantic. They showed that ancient vessels could have made the journey, not easily, but possible, and possibility for diffusionists became enough. Then came the Piri Reis map, an Ottoman admiral's map from 1513. It appeared to show the coastline of South America and West Africa, but it also seemed to show something else, a landmass in the southern Atlantic near the coast of Antarctica, a landmass that didn't appear on other maps of the time. Some claimed it was Antarctica before ice covered it. Others claimed it was Atlantis. The map became a rallying point for believers. But cartographers offer alternate explanations. The map was likely based on earlier maps from the Age of Exploration. The mysterious landmass could be a misidentified coastline or a cartographer's error. The Piri Reis map is remarkable for its era, but not evidence of a lost civilization. Navigation improved through copying and error correction. Unusual features don't require unusual origins. Yet the myth persists, because the diffusionist argument isn't really about evidence, it's about possibility. It's about the idea that the past is more mysterious than we think, that the story of human civilization is not a straight line of progress, but a tangled web of connections. The transatlantic empire theory asks us to believe that Atlantis was not just a place, but a force that shaped the destiny of two continents. That its influence can be seen in the pyramids of Egypt and the temples of the Maya, in the flood myths across cultures, in the very fabric of human civilization. It's a grand vision, and perhaps that's why it appeals to us. In a world that often feels fragmented, the idea of a shared origin is comforting. It suggests we come from the same source, that we are part of the same story. But is it true? That question has haunted researchers for centuries, and it may never be fully answered. The evidence is ambiguous. The patterns are suggestive, but not decisive. The similarities are intriguing, but not conclusive. What we can say is this: the diffusionist theory has pushed us to examine the ancient world more carefully. It has challenged our assumptions. It has reminded us that the past holds mysteries. And it has kept the door open, the door to the possibility that Atlantis was real, that its influence reached far beyond its shores. The evidence may be circumstantial, the arguments may be contested, the mainstream explanations may be more parsimonious, but the question remains, and it lingers in the air like a whisper carried on the wind. What if they were right? What science says about lost continents? Underwater mapping shows the seafloor around the Azores is typical oceanic crust. It's young, volcanic, and spreading. There's no hidden plateau of ancient continental rock, no sunken cities, no buried civilization. And what about the deeper parts of the Atlantic? The abyssal plains stretch across vast, flat expanses of ocean floor. If Atlantis had sunk there, we'd expect to find continental crust. We'd expect mountains, valleys, riverbeds. Instead, we find a smooth blanket of sediment, layer upon layer of fine mud and microscopic shells drifting down from the surface for millions of years. It's one of the quietest places on Earth, and it holds no secrets of a lost world. The tools of modern geology are remarkable. Sonar mapping creates detailed images of the seafloor. Core samples date the sediment layers. Seismic surveys see deep beneath the ocean floor. If a continent had sunk in the Atlantic, we would have found it by now. Not because geologists search for Atlantis specifically, but because they've mapped the ocean floor in extraordinary detail. They've explored it for oil, for minerals, for scientific understanding, and they've found nothing that resembles a sunken continent. This is the fundamental problem with the Atlantis in the Atlantic theory. It requires a geological impossibility. A mass of continental crust would have to appear in the middle of an ocean basin, rise above sea level, support a civilization, and then vanish without leaving a trace. The geology doesn't allow it. The physics doesn't allow it. The evidence doesn't support it. But what about the idea that Atlantis was a smaller island? A landmass big enough for a city, but not a continent? The Atlantic does have islands. Some are volcanic, like the Azores and Canaries. Some are small fragments of continental crust, like the Rockall Bank north of Scotland. but none of them match the description of Atlantis. None of them show evidence of a civilization that sank beneath the waves. And here's another thing. The sea level has changed dramatically over the past 20,000 years. During the last ice age, so much water was locked up in glaciers that the sea level was much lower. Land bridges existed where there are now straits. Coastal plains were dry. But even at its lowest point, the sea level was never low enough to expose a vast landmass in the middle of the Atlantic. The ocean floor is simply too deep there. The study of plate tectonics has revolutionized our understanding of the Earth. We now know that continents move. They break apart and collide. They're constantly changing. But the changes happen over millions of years. A continent doesn't sink in a day and a night, as Plato described. It doesn't vanish in a single catastrophic event. The very idea contradicts everything we know about how the Earth works. Now, it's true that some land does sink. Coastal areas can subside, islands can erode away. The Dogger Bank in the North Sea was once dry land. It flooded as ice melted and sea levels rose. The Persian Gulf was once a river valley. It's now underwater. These are real examples of land being lost to the sea. But here's the crucial point. These are shallow water events on continental shelves near the edges of continents. They don't happen in the deep ocean. They don't involve massive land masses sinking thousands of feet. The scale is completely different. The most dramatic examples of subsidence don't come close to matching the story of Atlantis. What happened to Dogger Bank took place over centuries as ice melted and the ocean rose. It wasn't sudden, it wasn't a single day and night, and it happened in shallow waters where we can study it directly. A sunken continent in the deep Atlantic would be something else entirely, something that violates everything we know about planetary geology. So where does this leave us? There is no sunken continent in the Atlantic. There never was. The ocean floor is too young, too volcanic, too well mapped to hide such a secret. This doesn't mean the search is meaningless. The search has value. It teaches us about geology. It teaches us about how myths form and evolve. But the search for a literal Atlantis in the Atlantic is a search for something that cannot exist. The Earth is a living, changing thing. Continents drift, oceans open and close, mountains rise and fall, but the changes are slow, almost imperceptible on a human timescale. The idea of a sudden, catastrophic sinking of an entire continent is impossible. The physics won't allow it, the geology won't allow it, the evidence won't allow it. Yet the myth persists, and perhaps that's the real lesson. The human mind is drawn to mystery. We want secrets beneath the waves. We want to believe that the ancient world was more advanced than we think. We want to believe that great civilizations rose and fell before us. And they did. But they weren't in the middle of the Atlantic. They were on the coasts, in the deltas along the rivers. They were in places where the land met the sea, and where the sea sometimes won. The real story of lost lands is more subtle than the myth. Rising seas swallowed coastal plains, earthquakes triggered tsunamis, erosion claimed city after city. The slow, patient work of water carved away what humans built. These stories are real. They're documented. They're found in the sediment and the ruins, but they're not in the deep Atlantic. The deep Atlantic holds only the quiet darkness of the abyss. No cities, no empires, no lost civilizations, just water and rock and time. When we ask what science says about lost continents, the answer is clear. Continents don't sink. They drift, they collide, they break apart, but they don't vanish overnight. The ocean floor is a record of geological time written in basalt and sediment. That record tells us that Atlantis as a literal place cannot exist. The myth endures anyway. Because the myth isn't really about geology. It's about us. It's about our fear of loss, our hope for survival, our wonder at the vastness of the world. The myth speaks to something that science can't measure. Science can tell us what's real, but myth tells us what matters. And sometimes those are two different things. The ocean is deep, the earth is old, and the human imagination is vast. All three come together in the story of Atlantis, a story that science cannot confirm, but a story that no amount of evidence can erase, because it lives not in the rocks and the water, but in us. Real sunken cities. The buildings collapsed in the same direction. The streets are covered in a thick layer of debris, all from the same period. Something terrible happened here, and it happened fast. The leading theory is a combination of natural disasters. The region sits on a fault line, and ancient records describe earthquakes striking the Nile Delta. When the ground shook, the soft, waterlogged clay beneath the city liquefied. The buildings essentially sank into the ground as the sea poured in. But there is another layer to this story. Recent studies have found evidence of a catastrophic flood event in the region around the same time. A massive wave, likely triggered by an earthquake, may have swept over the city. The combination was lethal. The ground gave way, the water rushed in, and Heracleon was gone in the span of a few hours, a city that had stood for centuries, a thriving port, a place of wealth and worship, gone in a single day and night of misfortune. Sound familiar? The parallels to the Atlantis story are hard to ignore. Plato described Atlantis as a mighty power that sank in a single day and night. Heracleon was exactly that, a real city, a real disaster, a real disappearance. But here's the crucial difference. Heracleon was found. We can dive down and touch its stones. We can study its artifacts. We can reconstruct its history. The mystery is not whether it existed. It is simply a matter of piecing together what happened. Atlantis, on the other hand, remains unfound, despite 2,000 years of searching. This is the pattern that repeats itself throughout history. The sea takes what it wants, and it does so more often than we like to admit. Consider the city of Port Royal in the Caribbean. In the late 1600s, it was known as the wickedest city on earth, a pirate haven, a place of gambling, drinking, and violence. It was also a wealthy English colony, a hub of trade and commerce. On the morning of June 7th, 1692, the ground began to shake. 3 earthquakes struck in quick succession. The sandy soil beneath the city turned to liquid. Buildings collapsed into the ground. The harbor waters surged forward, swallowing entire streets. When it was over, a third of the city lay beneath the sea. 2,000 people were dead. The rest fled inland, leaving the sunken part behind. Today, you can still dive down and see the ruins. The streets, the buildings, the cannons still pointing outward as if defending a place that no longer exists above the waves. Port Royal was not a myth. It was not an allegory. It was a real place, destroyed by real geological forces in a way that mirrors the Atlantis story almost perfectly. And then there is the city of Dwarka off the coast of India. According to Hindu tradition, Dwarka was the legendary capital of Lord Krishna, a golden city, rich and powerful, that was swallowed by the sea after Krishna's death. For centuries, it was dismissed as mythology, a religious story, a symbol, not a place. But in the 1980s, marine archaeologists discovered something remarkable. Beneath the waters of the Gulf of Combat, they found the remains of an ancient city. Stone walls, pillars, fortifications. The ruins stretched for miles along the seabed. Dating the site has been controversial. Some estimates suggest it could be thousands of years old, pushing back the timeline of civilization in the region. Others argue the dates are unreliable. But one thing is certain: a real city lies down there, a city that was once above water. The story of Dwarka's destruction speaks of the sea rising. The city was built on the coast, and at some point, the ocean claimed it. Whether it was a sudden event or a gradual process remains unclear, but the legend was rooted in truth. That is the pattern. Over and over again, we find that ancient stories of sunken cities are not pure invention. They are memories, distorted, exaggerated, embellished over centuries of retelling, but rooted in real events. The question becomes, what does this mean for Atlantis? If Heracleon was real, if Port Royal was real, if Dwarka was real, then why not Atlantis? If the sea can swallow one city, it can swallow another. If natural disasters can destroy one civilization, they can destroy another. This is the strongest argument for the historical reality of Atlantis. Not because we have found it, but because we have found so many others that met the same fate. The pattern is real. The mechanism is real. The sea has a long history of taking what was once on land. But here's where the story takes a turn. Every sunken city we have found has been found. We know where they are. We can see them. We can study them. Heracleon was discovered in a specific bay, in a specific location, based on careful research and determination. Port Royal is marked on maps. Dwarka was found in shallow water close to shore. Atlantis, if it exists, has remained hidden for over 2,000 years. Not just hidden, completely absent, no artifacts, no ruins, no evidence at all. Every claim of discovery has fallen apart under scrutiny. Every proposed location has turned out to be either a natural formation or a misunderstanding. Think about what that means. We have found cities that sank thousands of years ago, buried under mud and sand in deep water in remote locations. We have mapped the entire ocean floor. We have sonar technology that can detect a small object on the seabed, and yet no trace of Atlantis. Not a single stone, not a single inscription, not a single coin. The contrast is stark. Heracleon was lost for 1,000 years, but it left enough traces that a determined archaeologist could find it. Even the most obscure ancient cities leave something behind: a shard of pottery, a fragment of a wall. Something. Atlantis has left nothing. This is the uncomfortable truth that separates the real sunken cities from the myth. The real ones exist. We can dive down and touch them. We can bring artifacts to the surface and put them in museums. We can look at them and say, this was once a city. This is what happened to it. Atlantis remains in the realm of story. Beautiful, haunting, persistent, but story nonetheless. The sea is a great preserver. It keeps what it takes, and what it has taken, it eventually gives back. Heracleon waited 1,000 years to be found. Port Royal has been waiting 300. There are cities we have not found yet, cities that will surface when the technology improves or the conditions change. Perhaps the search for Atlantis is really a search for the next real city that will emerge from the depths and rewrite history. But until that day comes, the distinction holds. Real sunken cities exist. We have proof, we have photographs, we have artifacts. Atlantis, for now, remains a story waiting for its proof. Separating fact from fiction, separating fact from fiction. The ocean floor holds real treasures, real cities, real stories. You've seen the sunken columns of Heracleon, the statues rising from the murk, the temples that once echoed with prayers and now echo with silence. They make a documentary. The evidence, if there is any, is presented as already conclusive. Questions are dismissed as attacks. Skeptics are called closed-minded. The story spreads faster than the science can catch up. That's a red flag. Here's another one. Watch for claims that can't be tested. If someone says Atlantis lies beneath miles of Antarctic ice, ask yourself, what would prove that wrong? If there's no way to check, no way to verify, no way to falsify the claim, then it's not science, it's faith. And faith is fine for religion, but it doesn't belong in geology. The late astronomer Carl Sagan had a famous saying, extraordinary claims require extraordinary evidence. If someone tells you they found a sunken city, that's interesting. Show me the evidence. If someone tells you they found a sunken civilization with advanced technology that predates all known history, that's extraordinary. You need more than a blurry sonar image. You need artifacts. You need carbon dating. You need multiple independent lines of evidence that all point to the same conclusion. So far, no one has come close. Let's talk about Occam's razor. It's a principle that says when you have two explanations for the same thing, the simpler one is usually correct. Not always, but usually. Here's how it applies to Atlantis. You see a strange shape on the ocean floor. It looks like a city grid. Could it be a lost civilization? Sure. But could it also be a natural rock formation? Could it be a fishing net dragged by a trawler? Could it be an artifact of the sonar equipment itself? The simplest explanation isn't always the most exciting, but it's the one that fits the evidence best. The Baltic Sea anomaly is a perfect example. When the sonar image first surfaced, people saw a spaceship, a secret Nazi base, a lost city. The internet went wild, but geologists looked at the same image and saw something different. A glacial deposit, a rock dragged by ice during the last ice age, nothing more. The ship-shaped outline was just how the sonar rendered an irregular mound on the seafloor. No aliens, no Atlantis, just geology. Here's another red flag: cherry picking. This happens when someone takes only the evidence that supports their theory and ignores everything else. They'll point to one ancient map that seems to show Antarctica without ice. They'll ignore the hundreds of other maps that show nothing of the sort. They'll quote one ancient text that mentions a great flood. They'll ignore the dozens of other texts that reference completely different stories. Real science considers all the evidence. Pseudoscience selects only the convenient parts. Also, watch for vague language. Words like may, could, perhaps, and might are fine in moderation. But when a claim is built entirely on these words, it's not a claim, it's a hope. Real science says The evidence suggests this happened. Pseudoscience says, could this be proof of a lost civilization? Notice the difference. Another common pattern is the appeal to mystery. The argument goes something like this: mainstream archaeologists can't explain this, therefore it must be Atlantis. This is called an argument from ignorance. Just because we don't know something doesn't mean we never will. Ancient structures that once seemed impossible to build have been explained through patient study. The pyramids, Stonehenge, the Nazca lines. Each one was labeled as the work of aliens or lost civilizations at some point. Each one turned out to be the work of human hands, using tools and methods we now understand. Mystery is not evidence. Mystery is just a gap in our knowledge. And gaps, by their nature, are meant to be filled. Now, let's be fair. The Atlantis story has a strange power over us. It speaks to something deep in the human psyche. The idea that a great civilization once existed, achieved wonders we can barely imagine, and then vanished. It's compelling. It offers hope. Hope that we're not alone in our achievements. Hope that the past holds secrets we've yet to unlock. And it offers comfort. Comfort that even our greatest failures might be forgiven, buried under the waves, hidden from judgment. But that emotional pull is exactly why we need to be careful. The more we want something to be true, the more we need to scrutinize the evidence. Let's walk through a practical exercise. Imagine someone presents you with a claim about Atlantis. Here's how to evaluate it. First, check the source. Who is making the claim? Are they a trained geologist, an archaeologist, an oceanographer, or are they a writer, a filmmaker, a self-described researcher? Credentials don't guarantee truth, but they do suggest a familiarity with the methods and standards of the field. Second, look for the evidence, not just descriptions of evidence, actual evidence, photographs you can examine, data you can analyze, artifacts you can hold. If the evidence is always just out of reach, if you're told it exists but can't see it, be suspicious. Third, ask about the process. Was this discovery peer-reviewed? Was it presented at a scientific conference? Was it published in a reputable journal? If not, why not? Sometimes good science takes time to reach publication, but claims that never go through the process at all should be treated with caution. Fourth, consider the motive. Is the person making money from their claim? Are they selling books, films, tours, speaking fees? Financial incentive doesn't automatically disqualify someone, but it should make you look closer. Fifth, apply Occam's razor. What's the simplest explanation that fits all the facts? If the simplest explanation is a natural formation, it's probably a natural formation. If the simplest explanation is a myth that grew over time, it's probably a myth. And finally, remember the difference between possibility and probability. Almost anything is possible. It's possible that Atlantis existed exactly as Plato described it. It's possible that an advanced civilization was destroyed in a single day and night. But possibility is not the same as likelihood. The evidence we have, geological, archaeological, historical, points in a different direction. It points to a story that grew from real events, real places, and real disasters. A story that was shaped by human imagination and retold across generations. This doesn't make the story worthless. Far from it. Myths carry meaning. They carry wisdom. They carry the hopes and fears of the people who told them. But wisdom and meaning are not the same as historical fact. The search for Atlantis has taught us a lot, not about a lost civilization, but about ourselves, about our need for mystery, our hunger for meaning, our willingness to believe, and our ability to be fooled. So when you hear the next Atlantis claim, and there will be another one, there always is, take a breath, ask your questions, look at the evidence, and remember that the truth, when it's found, will be more beautiful than any fantasy, because it will be real. The legacy in literature and pop culture. And for over 2,000 years, the tale of Atlantis has done exactly that, shifting shape with every telling, bending to fit the fears and dreams of each new age. Plato gave the world the original warning, a proud civilization drunk on its own power, swallowed by the sea in a single day and night. But then something curious happened. The Renaissance arrived, and with it, a hunger for lost knowledge. Scholars dusted off Plato's dialogues and read them with fresh eyes. Suddenly, Atlantis was not just a warning from the past. It was a promise of what the past might hold, an advanced civilization that had mastered arts and sciences long since lost. Take the utopian writers of the 16th and 17th centuries. They looked at Atlantis and saw a blueprint, a perfect society organized and wise before its tragic fall. They began to imagine what such a society might look like if it had never been destroyed. They wrote their own versions: ideal cities, perfect governments, harmonious worlds. Atlantis became a dream of what humanity could be, rather than a warning of what it might lose. But the true transformation came in the 20th century. It rose from the depths in spectacular fashion. It became a setting for adventure, a realm of wonder and danger. The first films imagined it as a place of grandeur, towering columns, glittering treasures, advanced machinery powered by mysterious crystals. It was a playground for heroes and explorers. Then science fiction took hold. Atlantis moved from the ocean floor to the stars. Writers imagined it as the remnant of an ancient alien civilization, its technology far beyond human understanding. Others placed it in other dimensions, hidden from our world by a thin veil of reality. The lost city was no longer just a place, it was a concept, a way of asking, what if the world was bigger and stranger than we know? And then there were the superheroes. The comics took Atlantis and gave it a king, a warrior with a trident and a noble heart, ruling over an underwater kingdom of breathtaking beauty and fierce power. This version of Atlantis became one of the most recognized in the world. Millions of people who had never read a single page of Plato knew the name of this underwater realm. They knew its towers, its currents, its royal family. The philosophical warning had become a vibrant living world. The shift is remarkable. What began as a moral lesson became a physical place. What was once a story about pride became a story about adventure. What was once a warning became a dream. But the most interesting development came when Atlantis moved beyond fiction entirely. In the 20th century, it began to appear in what claimed to be fact. Books were published, presented as true histories. They claimed that Atlantis was not just real, but that its people had shaped the entire course of human civilization. They had built pyramids. They had taught the Egyptians. They had seeded the cultures of the Americas. They had possessed powers we can barely imagine. These books were wildly popular. They sold millions of copies. They inspired countless readers to look at the ancient world with new wonder. Even when scientists dismissed them, even when the evidence fell apart under scrutiny, the idea refused to die. Because it had stopped being about evidence. It had become about longing. And that is the secret at the heart of Atlantis. It is a story that has survived because it speaks to something deep in the human soul. It speaks to our fear that we have lost something precious. It speaks to our hope that the past was greater than we know. It speaks to our desire for a world that is more magical, more mysterious, more meaningful than the one we see around us. Each generation has reshaped Atlantis in its own image. The Victorians made it a tragic romance. The early filmmakers made it a spectacle. The science fiction writers made it a cosmic mystery. The New Age movements made it a source of ancient wisdom. The superhero comics made it a grand adventure, and in each telling, the core of the story remained the same: a great civilization, a sudden fall, a secret beneath the waves. This is why Atlantis has persisted where so many other legends have faded. It is endlessly adaptable. It can be a warning or a dream. It can be a place or a symbol. It can be ancient history or modern fantasy. It can hold any meaning a storyteller needs it to hold. Consider the sheer range of its appearances. It has been the setting for children's cartoons and epic operas. It has been the subject of serious academic study and wild speculative fiction. If It has been a metaphor for political corruption, a symbol of environmental destruction, a vision of technological wonder. It has been all things to all people, and the public imagination has never tired of it. Every few years, a new book or film or game rediscovers Atlantis. Each time, it finds a new audience. Each time, the legend grows a little more. It is a story that feeds on attention, growing richer and stranger with every retelling. There is a kind of magic in this. A story that has been told for over 2,000 years and still has the power to surprise us, still has the power to make us wonder, still has the power to make us look at the ocean and think, what if? The writers of ancient Greece told it as a cautionary tale. The explorers of the Renaissance searched for it as a lost treasure. The dreamers of the Romantic Age sang of it as a beautiful tragedy. The filmmakers of the modern era built it as a spectacle. The storytellers of today continue to find new angles, new questions, new wonders. What will the next telling look like? Perhaps the future will imagine Atlantis in ways we cannot yet conceive. Perhaps it will be a virtual world, a digital kingdom. Perhaps it will be a lesson about climate change, a story of a civilization destroyed by its own disregard for the natural world. Perhaps it will be a source of hope, a reminder that even after great loss, something new can rise. One thing seems certain. As long as human beings dream, Atlantis will be there. It will keep changing. It will keep adapting. It will keep speaking to us across the centuries, a voice from beneath the waves, asking us to remember what we have lost and imagine what we might yet become. The ocean is vast, and it holds many secrets, but none has captured our imagination quite like this one. A city of gold and marble, a people of wisdom and strength, a fall so sudden and complete that even the memory of it became a legend. And in that legend, we see ourselves, our ambitions, our pride, our hope, our fear, all of it reflected in the shimmering towers of a city that never really existed and yet will never truly disappear. The spiritual and esoteric Atlantis. This was history as cosmic drama. It had no need for archaeological proof. The truth was written in the soul, not in the soil. For Blavatsky's followers, Atlantis became a spiritual homeland, a lost paradise that humanity was destined to rediscover within itself. The theosophical vision spread far beyond its immediate circle, influencing artists, writers, and thinkers across Europe and America. And it spawned a fascinating subphenomenon, the psychic channeling of Atlantis. The most famous of these channelers was Edgar Cayce. A humble photographer from Kentucky, Cayce discovered he could enter trance states and answer questions about health and healing. His readings addressed personal ailments, but they also ranged far beyond. People asked about their past lives and ancient civilizations, and Atlantis featured prominently in over 2,000 of his readings. Cayce's Atlantis was different from Blavatsky's. He described a technologically advanced civilization that existed roughly 50,000 years ago. Its people had mastered electricity, aviation, and even forms of energy we still do not fully understand today. They used crystals for power and communication and traveled the globe with ease. But the same story of decline emerges. Case spoke of two factions within Atlantis. One group followed the law of one, living in harmony with spiritual principles, while the other, called the Sons of Belial, pursued selfish power and material gain. Their conflict escalated over thousands of years until the misuse of crystal technology triggered massive explosions, and the resulting earthquakes and floods destroyed the continent. Case told his followers that many souls incarnated in Atlantis now live among us. They have returned, he said, to help humanity avoid repeating the same mistakes. This idea proved enormously appealing. It gave people a personal stake in the Atlantis myth. They were not just hearing an old story, but living participants in a cosmic drama of fall and redemption. The concept of past lives opened another door. Through regression therapy, countless individuals have remembered their Atlantean incarnations, describing grand ceremonies, crystal temples, and dramatic deaths in the flood. Skeptics note that these memories conveniently align with popular depictions of Atlantis. But for those who experience them, the recalled lives feel profoundly real. Secret societies also embraced the mystical Atlantis. The Hermetic Order of the Golden Dawn, a magical order founded in Victorian London, incorporated Atlantean themes into its rituals. Its members studied ceremonial magic, seeking to awaken hidden powers within themselves. Atlantis represented the pinnacle of human achievement before the fall, and they hoped to restore that ancient glory. The influence extended to more famous figures. Aleister Crowley, the self-proclaimed beast, claimed contact with hidden masters and wove elements of Atlantean mythology into his elaborate magical system. His contemporary Dion Fortune wrote fiction and nonfiction that drew upon the theosophical Atlantis, her novels describing psychic warfare between the forces of light and darkness that echoed the Atlantean struggle. Even the Nazis found inspiration in the mystical Atlantis. Some occultists within the party believed that a pure Aryan race had originated in Atlantis, and that the survivors of the flood had seeded the world's great civilizations. This belief fed their racial theories and their obsession with ancient origins. Expeditions were sent to Tibet and elsewhere, searching for traces of this lost heritage. The misuse of the legend for such purposes casts a long shadow over its esoteric tradition. As the 20th century progressed, the spiritual Atlantis continued to evolve. New Age movements of the 1960s and 70s embraced it enthusiastically. Atlantis became a symbol of a lost golden age that humanity could recreate, representing unity with nature, harmony between technology and spirit, and a society free from war and greed. The myth was no longer just about the past, it was a template for the future. Psychics and channelers produced a steady stream of Atlantean revelations. Some claimed to be reincarnated Atlantean priests or priestesses. Others said they were in contact with Atlantean masters who had retreated into subterranean cities or other dimensions. Each account added new details, new technologies, and new spiritual teachings, making the story richer, more complex, and entirely unverifiable. The esoteric Atlantis also found its way into the landscape of modern spirituality. Sacred sites were reinterpreted through an Atlantean lens. The pyramids of Egypt became Atlantean constructions, Stonehenge became an Atlantean energy grid, and the Bermuda Triangle became a leftover Atlantean power source. Every mystery of the ancient world could be explained by reference to this lost civilization. This impulse reveals something deep about human psychology. We want our origins to be significant and to believe that our ancestors were greater than we are. The esoteric Atlantis offers a story of fall and potential redemption. It says that once, long ago, we achieved greatness, lost it through our own failures, but the memory remains, and we can reclaim it. The appeal is understandable. Modern life is complex and often alienating. The esoteric Atlantis offers simplicity and meaning. It provides a grand narrative that connects each individual to a cosmic purpose and transforms personal struggles into chapters of a larger story. Who would not want to be part of such a tale? The spiritual dimension of Atlantis also speaks to a longing for transcendence. The material world, with all its limitations, is not enough. We want to believe in something beyond the visible. Atlantis, as imagined by the mystics, is not merely a place but a state of being, a higher level of consciousness that we can aspire to reach. This is why the esoteric tradition has proven so resilient. It does not depend on physical evidence. It operates in the realm of faith and inner experience. For those who accept its premises, the truth of Atlantis is not a matter of archaeology, but of spiritual awakening. The proof lies not in ruins beneath the sea, but in the depths of one's own soul. The mystical Atlantis continues to evolve even now. New channelers emerge with fresh revelations, and new books describe the Atlantean teachings in ever greater detail. The internet has connected seekers across the globe, creating a thriving community of Atlantean enthusiasts. Online forums host discussions of Atlantean energy work, and social media pages share images of crystal temples and flying machines. The legend has found new life in the digital age, yet for all its fantastical elements, the esoteric Atlantis serves a real purpose. It gives people a framework for understanding their place in the universe and offers hope that the future can be better than the past. It reminds us that civilizations rise and fall, but the human spirit endures. Whether the physical Atlantis ever existed matters less than what the story represents. The mystics have transformed Atlantis into something Plato could never have imagined. They have made it a mirror for our deepest hopes and fears. They have given it a soul, and in doing so, they have ensured that the legend will never die. It lives on in the hearts of all who seek a lost homeland, a forgotten wisdom, a path back to something greater than ourselves. What remains to be discovered? A searcher sees a mysterious shape on a sonar image and feels the pulse quicken. A mind hears a legend and thinks, what if? What if there is more to our past than we know? What if we are not the first? What if the story is not just a story? These questions have driven explorers to remote corners of the globe. They have sent divers to the bottom of the sea. They have inspired engineers to build submersibles that can withstand crushing pressure. They have fueled research into ancient maps, sediment cores, ice samples, DNA. The search for Atlantis has, paradoxically, produced real discoveries. The Minoan civilization was real. The Bronze Age collapse was real. The Sea Peoples were real. The flood myths are real, and they are everywhere. The ocean has swallowed many true cities, not mythical but actual. Heracleion, Port Royal, Pavlopetri, Dwarka. These are not legends. They are places we can touch, treasures we can bring to the surface, histories we can reconstruct with careful excavation. The myth has been a gateway to reality. That is its quiet gift. So, what remains to be discovered? Not perhaps the city of gold and marble that Plato described, not the ringed canals in the Temple of Poseidon. The sea has given up many secrets, and it holds many more, but a continent in the Atlantic is not among them. The science is settled on that point. And yet, the deeper question remains open. The question of why we tell this story. The question of what it means that every culture on Earth has a version of it. The flood comes, the city falls, the survivors remember. The story is passed down through generations, changing shape but never disappearing. There is something true at the core of that pattern, something that happened, something that was remembered. Not a single event, perhaps, but many events layered and merged over time. A great tsunami in the Mediterranean, a volcanic eruption that darkened the sky, a civilization that collapsed under the weight of its own ambition, a flood in Mesopotamia that wiped away everything people had built. These events were real. They happened, and the people who survived them told stories. The stories grew, the stories traveled, the stories became myth. And in becoming myth, they became more than history. They became meaning. So the future of the search is not about finding a literal Atlantis. It is about understanding what the story is trying to tell us. It is about humility. The Minoan peoples were the most advanced of their time. Their palaces were wonders. Their art was beautiful. Their ships sailed the seas with confidence. And then the earth shook, and the sea rose, and the sky turned black, and their world ended. It can happen to any of us. That is the message. That is the warning that Plato encoded in his tale. Power does not protect you. Wealth does not shield you. The earth does not care about your pride. The sea does not respect your achievements. This is not a comfortable truth, which is perhaps why we keep looking for a different ending, why we keep hoping that the city is out there, intact, waiting to be found. Because if we can find it, we can study it. And if we can study it, we can learn its mistakes. And if we can learn its mistakes, we can avoid them. The search for Atlantis is, at its heart, a search for safety, a hope that the past can protect us from the future, a belief that knowledge is power, and that if we know enough, we will be safe. But the sea does not make such bargains. The earth does not negotiate. Science will continue to advance. New tools will be developed. New eyes will look at old data. The deep sea will be explored further. Sediment cores will be extracted from the ocean floor. Ancient DNA will be sequenced. Climate models will improve. And each new discovery will fill in more of the picture. We will learn more about the Bronze Age collapse. We will understand better what happened at Thera. We will trace the movements of ancient peoples across the oceans. We will find more cities beneath the waves. We will reconstruct more of the human story. And still, the mystery will remain. Because the mystery is not in the ground, it is not in the sediment, it is not in the ice or the rock or the water. The mystery is in the human mind. It is in the space between what we know and what we long to know. It is in the question itself, which is more precious than any answer. And that is why Atlantis will endure. Not as a place, but as a question. Not as a fact, but as a possibility. Not as a discovery, but as a horizon that recedes as we approach it. Perhaps that is the real lesson. Perhaps we are not meant to find it. Perhaps the search is the point. There is a kind of wisdom in not knowing, a spaciousness, a humility. The ancient peoples understood this. They knew that forces beyond their control were not always kind, that destiny was not always fair, that the world was not always explainable. They built their myths to hold these truths. Atlantis was one of those vessels. It held the fear of hubris and the hope of redemption. It held the warning that nothing lasts. It held the dream that something might. And we are still holding it. We pass it from hand to hand, from generation to generation, from culture to culture. We add to it, we reshape it, we argue about it, we search for it. And in all of that, we keep something alive. Not the memory of a city, but the capacity for wonder, the willingness to ask questions, the courage to face the unknown. The story of Atlantis is a mirror. It shows us our fears and our hopes. It shows us our limits and our possibilities. It shows us who we are, and that is why it will never be found, because it was never lost. It was always here, waiting for us, in the stories we tell, and the questions we ask, and the depths of our own imagination. The waves will keep rolling, the sands will keep shifting, the sea will keep its silence, and the search will continue. Not because we believe we will find it, but because the search itself is the discovery. The question itself is the answer. The mystery itself is the meaning. So the next time you stand at the edge of the ocean and look out at the horizon, know that you are looking at the same mystery that Plato saw, the same mystery that the Egyptians whispered to Solon, the same mystery that has called to every explorer, every dreamer, every seeker who has ever wondered what lies beneath. You are not looking for a city, you are looking for yourself. And that is a discovery that will never end.